Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Katarzyna Zysk. I'm professor, head of research and deputy director for here at the IFS, Norwegian Institute for Defense Studies. And on behalf of the IFS, which is a part of the Norwegian Defense University College, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to our seminar today on cyber defense. Our discussion today will focus in particular on how small countries in the Nordic region, such as Norway and the Baltic states, can successfully defend themselves against contemporary cyber threats. The seminar is organized by Senior Fellow and Head of the Defense Planning Research Program here at the IFS, Dr. Håkon Lunde Saxi, who will take over in a moment. The seminar is also a result of a cooperation with the embassies of the 3 Baltic states here in Norway. And I would like to thank for the outstanding collaboration that brought us all here today, the Embassy of Latvia, the Embassy of Lithuania, and last but not least, the Embassy of Estonia, and in particular, Ambassador Jan Joesar Ruusalu for initiating this cooperation project last year. I would also like to thank Dr. Saxi for making this event happen by successfully developing the initial idea into today's stimulating seminar program. I'm delighted to see so many of you here today, over 160 participants with a full waiting list. And the interest reflects the growing importance of cyberspace to our world and to our defense. Developments in cyber domain have not only increased the complexity in the threat environment we are facing today, but they had added a 4th dimension to the traditionally 3-dimensional format of warfare played at land, sea, and in air. The new technology, unconstrained by traditional borders, by traditional front lines, able to reach anywhere with unprecedented speed, require innovative thinking and an innovative approach to defense, deterrence, and coercion. Cyber domain is already a feature in great power competition, influencing the balance of power between key actors, including the United States, China, Russia. All influential strategic players develop and deploy offensive cyber capabilities, giving priority to information dominance. Some of them, such as Russia, consider information dominance a decisive factor at all levels of contemporary conflict. At the same time, the accessibility of cyber domain has expanded the range of non-state hostile actors that are already today capable of deploying offensive, advanced cyber capabilities. And together with disruptive technologies, such as artificial intelligence, quantum computing, cyber capabilities are likely to change dynamics of crisis escalation in the future, potentially in fundamental ways. And these interconnected systems may, in perspective in the future, give an actor critical superiority. So we need a better understanding of these developments and a faster adaptation to these new realities to get the cyber defense right. And the IFS aims to contribute to that by developing research portfolio and stimulating discussions such as the one today on strategic and operation implications of this new domain, the new technologies, not least in terms of deterrence, alliance dynamics, strategic stability, and interstate competition. We are fortunate to have with us today a team of Norwegian and international experts that will help us to better understand some of these new dynamics, and with a particular reference to small states in the Nordic-Baltic region. So I wish you all an excellent seminar, and on that note, I'll leave the floor to Dr. Saxi, who will present our speakers today and who will present the thematic focus in each of the panels. Thank you. Håkon?
Thank you, Katarzyna. Ladies and gentlemen, cyber defense is today firmly on the agenda in the transatlantic security community. Cyber threats and attacks are becoming more common, sophisticated, and damaging every day, making it a matter of top priority to enhance and strengthen the defense of our national cyber infrastructure and networks. Now, this is the second larger seminar as part of IFS's Defense Planning Research Program, which contributes to long-term planning in the Norwegian defense sector. Through both closed and open seminars, briefings, policy notes, as well as more in-depth research, the program aims to highlight and analyze pressing issues relevant for Norwegian defense planning. Now, long-term planning has to be seen in a broad national perspective, and this is arguably especially important in the realms of cyber. Neither the Norwegian Armed Forces nor the Norwegian defense sector will be able to defend Norway in the cyber domain or aid in the defense of our allies and partners without very close cooperation with the civilian sector. The civilian sector not only possesses much of the infrastructure that should be defended, but also much of the knowledge, competencies, and capabilities required to protect and safeguard this infrastructure. As such, the defense sector and the civilian sector has to work very closely together. Fortunately, in Norway, we have a long tradition of defense and the civilian sector working closely together for the purpose of national defense within our total defense concept. But how do we actually do total defense in the cyber domain? Who are responsible for protecting vital but privately owned infrastructure and information? How does one detect and counter attempts at cyber sabotage or espionage? And what about attempts at using cyber tools to influence our public discussions and decision-making, national decision-making? Is it a government responsibility to counter fake news on Facebook or Twitter? And if so, how should it be done? These are some of the many questions that today we'll have the opportunity to ask no less than 6 distinguished cyber experts. And let me just briefly take the time to present each of them in turn. Now, we have organized these experts into 2 panels with slightly different themes. The first panel deals with cyber defense in general, with special emphasis on countering the overt use of cyber tools such as hacking or cyber espionage. First off, on this panel, we have Director Sven Sakov from the International Center for Defense and Security, the ICDS in Estonia. Before joining ICDS, Sven served 2 years as the Director of NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence, a multinational hub of cyber defense expertise based in Estonia. Secondly, we have Professor Olav Lysne from the University of Oslo. Now, Professor Lysne is probably most famous in Norway for having chaired no less than 2 government inquiries into how to strengthen readiness and reduce digital vulnerability in Norway. So we're very much looking forward to getting an update on the recommendations made by these inquiries. Thirdly, we have Bente Hoff, who serves as Director of Cybersecurity at the National Security Authority, NSM. Bente will give us a practitioner's perspective on how to build resilience, detect and counter cyber attacks. The second panel deals with digital influence operations, namely the use of cyber tools to affect the perceptions of Western societies. First out on the second panel, we have Director Jed Willard from the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Foundation at Harvard University. Jed works on public diplomacy, influence operations, and disinformation, and he is, I think, convinced that we are doing at least some things right in the Nordic-Baltic region when it comes to dealing with disinformation. Secondly, we have Jonas Garbinskas, who serves as Director of Cybersecurity and IT Department at the Lithuanian Ministry of National Defense. He will provide us with a Baltic perspective on the digital disinformation challenge. Last but not least, we have Branch Chief Marko Mantila from NATO Strategic Communications Center of Excellence, Stratcom, in Latvia. Before this, he was the Director General of Government Communications at the Finnish Prime Minister's Office, where he had to contend with Russian propaganda and influence operations. Now, each of these highly qualified experts will do a 15-minute presentation, after which there will be a 15-minute panel discussion. In between the 2 panels, there will be a 15-minute coffee break, so that we'll all have the opportunity to stretch our legs and clear our minds. And these panel discussions will be moderated respectively by Senior Advisor Bjørn Svenungsen, who is presently IFS's in-house cyber expert on a loan from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Senior Fellow Hanne Røslien from the Norwegian Cyber Defense Force. Now, during the panel discussion, you are encouraged to ask tough and provocative questions from these highly competent experts. But first, without further ado, let's kick off with the first panel. Director Sven Sakov, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Håkon. And good morning, everybody. I might be coughing, don't worry, I'm not going to die yet, but this day will come one day. As a first speaker here this morning, I will maybe do a bit of introduction. First, why does it matter why we talk about cyber defense? Who are the actors? I really will mostly concentrate and focus on the malicious state-to-state activities in cyberspace, because in my opinion that is the most dangerous and most advanced one. What are the myths in that regard, what we need to debunk, and what we can do as nations, but also as an alliance in NATO, and maybe more on the case of NATO. First picture here, this is a hiking trail through the bog in Estonia. But basically it's here to say that, to remind us all, why does it matter? It matters because we need to defend our way of life. You can picture whatever thing what you like here, and this is basically why it matters. It matters because we have used to, for the last couple of decades, to talk about cybersecurity as a cybersecurity of computers. Nowadays, more and more, we should be talking about cybersecurity of everything, because everything is becoming a computer. The home devices, thermostats, refrigerators, cars, aircraft. There are people who basically say that we do not have really cars anymore. We have computers with wheels, and we don't have aircraft, we have computers with wings. And of course, everything what has a computer and is connected to anything is possible to be hacked, also even if it's not connected to anything. I do not know why people want to have a refrigerator which sends them email, also can actually participate in a botnet activity, in a criminal world, taken over by the criminals, or is maybe spying on you. But unfortunately, this is basically where the world is going. All our critical infrastructure, more and more, is connected through the industrial control systems or SCADA systems. And that basically means that we're not talking just about inconvenience of your beer being warm when you get home, if someone has taken over a refrigerator, but actually that we do not have power, because the power station has been hacked. Usually, traditionally, they, and this is since 1970s, there have been distinguished between three types of things what attackers in a cyberspace want to achieve. They either are going against the confidentiality of information, against the availability of information, or against the integrity of information. What we hear from radio, watch TV, and read, it's mostly about the confidentiality of information. Another company being hacked, 500,000 or 500 million credentials, people's credit cards, so forth, have been put online. I would say that this is a nuisance, but this is not life-threatening. So basically, if you're driving a car and someone hacks your car and tells the world where you are, it might be a nuisance if you want some privacy. But if they hack your car and turn the brakes off, meaning they attack both integrity of your information system and the availability of your information system, meaning brakes, then this is a totally different matter. This is a book just out a couple of months ago by Bruce Schneier. So basically, the title says it. It's actually on this theme what I just talked. I really highly recommend. The other classical way of distinguish basically actors in cyberspace, the malicious actors, people are talking about hackers, hacktivists, criminals, and then also nation states. In terms of the malicious activities on cyberspace, most is crime. But I would say that the crime is not the most important, the most dangerous thing what we need to tackle with. We should be actually most concerned by the nation-state actors, by what are called in a geek language APTs, advanced persistent threat. Basically, nation-state who has resources and time to breach, to take hold of information, to, if necessary, have an impact on the functionality of the information systems. So, and basically, we're talking about different ways of influencing another country through the means basically carried through the internet. There is an old saying that there are no borders in cyberspace. It's debatable whether this is really so. When you look at China, for example, and a great firewall of China. But I think one thing what I want to say very clearly is that even if there are no borders, there is clearly a geopolitics is still alive and kicking in cyberspace. If this type of event would have been organized in Seoul, in South Korea, it's going to be all about People's Republic of China and North Korea. Here, in this part of the world, we're mostly talking about Russia. If this event would be happening in Bahrain, we'll be all talking only about Iran. That basically means that cyberspace is influenced by geopolitics. This is, for example, for your information, the Russian malicious state cyber actors. This specific picture is from the yearbook of Estonian Foreign Intelligence Service. So you can actually look it up if you Google. So it's online. You can find it online. Usually, when the cybersecurity companies identify threat actors who belong to nation state, they refrain from naming countries. They usually put, a number, APT 28 or 29. So there's actually Russian FSB and GRU, two intelligence services. Or they put a fancy names like Fancy Bear, Cozy Bear, Tsar Team, and so forth. Again, we are here, in all those cases, talking about Russian state-owned or state-controlled cyber actors. They who basically go back a long time. The first attacks attributable to Soviet Union / Russia were from 1986. The biggest one, the big one was in 1998, a Moonlight Maze against the US military. In 2007, we saw a whole-scale attack against one nation state, my own, Estonia, for political purposes. 2008, in a war against Georgia, Russia used the kinetic war efforts and a cyber war in conjunction, supporting each other. So basically, we integrated that into the main kinetic military effort. We have seen in 2015 and 2016 Russian attacks against Ukrainian power grid, basically affecting electricity supply. So basically attacks against the industrial control systems, against our basic utilities and needs. 2016, the influence operation or information warfare operation against the United States, interfering in election in the United States. I think the next panel, the second panel, will delve thoroughly into it. I'm not going to say much more here, besides the fact that, for example, there are two phases for that operation. First was basically hacking, espionage. That's quote-unquote normal. All our countries have intelligence services we pay, and we want them to read other gentlemen's email. Abnormal in state-to-state relations is when, if that information gained by espionage is then used for information warfare needs or ends. And then 2017, a very important milestone, when actually the destructive cyber attack was launched against Ukraine, the NotPetya attack by Russian actors. And that went basically viral, went out. And of course, close by here, Denmark's Maersk shipping company was very hardly hit. Global damages from that destructive cyber attack were in the vicinity of $10 billion. So this is a major thing. I want to caution, though, one thing, is that we should be distinguishing two things. One is the cyber attacks against the functionality of our systems. And another is the attacks which are basically a means for the information warfare end. In Russian understanding of the world, information warfare, or informationna vojna, is overriding principle, and the cyber attacks are mostly in support of that. So basically that's what you saw, for example, in DNC hack or in a hack of Jean Podesta's email. Next, my time is running horribly quickly. I need to speed up. And next I want to debunk 3 myths when it comes to state-to-state malicious activities in cyberspace. First myth is that there is no law. People say, well, yeah, the international law does not cover that. It's wrong. The NATO heads and state and government in 2014, the summit in Wales, declared that existing international law, what we have, does apply to cyberspace. It doesn't matter which space we're talking about, law is the same, including Geneva Conventions when you talk about law of war. EU's Bell law. The NATO Cyber Center in Tallinn gathered together a group of 20 or so renowned international legal experts who went through the whole body of existing international law and came out with close to 700 pages of a legal text, shifting through everything and basically trying to make sense how does that existing international law, lex lata, apply in malicious cyber activities between nation states. By the way, it doesn't matter if the nation states say, well, this is a hacking group, we don't know really. If you can prove that actually the state is in effective control of that group, the state is responsible for activities of that group. Second myth, what do we hear very often? People are saying, well, but attribution is very difficult. Attribution is impossible. How can you do that? It's not. It's a myth. Attribution is hard. But if the attack is really ominous, what you have suffered, big countries, US in particular, is more than capable of attributing attacks, not just against countries or specific organizations or specific units, but specific people. This is from an FBI webpage. US attorneys are indicting specific individuals, usually in China, Russia, or Iran, pretty much regularly, maybe once a month or two. The problem with attribution is, first is attribution lag. It takes time. So basically what happens is that you hit me in the face, I will go and analyze the situation for half a year, come back and say, you did it, and now I hit you back. So that's a problem. I think doing a coalition attribution, more countries together, is one of the tricks how to solve that. For example, the NotPetya attack was attributed to Russia by, I think, 7 different NATO countries, my own including, also US, UK, and Denmark, which suffered the most from NATO countries. The other problem with attribution is that very often your information, which gives you a good confidence that this country did it, might come from your own intelligence efforts, either human intelligence, cyber intelligence, SIGINT, or something else. And basically, you do not want to provide evidence because you will blow your operations. So basically, that's something, again, what you can do inside a coalition, where you can actually share information which is very sensitive, in specific settings, but unfortunately this is not something that you can use in the public. And now I'm going over time, so basically just throw me out to organizers if I'm eating into other people's time too much. The third myth is that we are in a cyber war. Well-intending, good people say that regularly. Very good, solid US senators are saying that regularly. I think it's wrong. It's wrong because, first, we haven't seen people dying yet, or things blown up in big numbers. One example we have had, that was a Stuxnet virus. We have not seen people killed, and we are not in a state of war. If we are in a state of war, then that would be a totally different war game. The gloves will be off, and our power stations will fail, our electricity grid will fail, our water purification systems might fail. So you might ask, why, for example, the New York Times reported that Russian digital fingerprints are all across US power grid? It's not just for the fun of it. So this is what the Russians call preparing the battlefield. There are two very different takes on where we are. One from Richard Clark, which basically we are in a cyber war, and another by Thomas Reed, which basically I support very much what Thomas Reed is saying. Very wonderful book, maybe 4 or 5 years old, but I think it's still relevant, on basically debunking this myth that we are in a cyber war. So what will need to be done? Individually, as an organization, as a nation state, and international organizations. I'm not going to talk about individual cyber hygiene. You see that this is the reality. So people are saying, please don't have a two-factor authentication on the devices, but actually the real problem already is here. You don't even have to have a lot of brute force computing power to crack such kind of things. You can just try. So basically, individual cyber hygiene organizations, there are people who know much more about that, can do basically the processes. Nation states should do the defense, cyber defense, CERT activities, and so forth. International organization, I think we can train together, we can do collective attribution, and by the way, we can, may I remind you, go to war because one of the NATO nations, has suffered a devastating cyber attack. I do not have time to show you a video. It's a 3-minute video in YouTube, but please check it out. It's called Locked Shields 2017 Execution, or 2018 Execution. Locked Shields. This is basically the largest, most complex international cyber defense exercise, hosted in Tallinn, Estonia, by NATO CCDCO in NATO Cyber Center. Last year, there were 22 teams participating, 4,000 virtual machines in a cyber range, including, for example, Power Grid, by Siemens, the Ericsson network systems, PLCs, so programmable logic controllers, were working. In 2017, we had, for example, air command and control system and so forth. Water purification was also one part of the game. So basically, Locked Shields 2017 execution, 2018 execution. NATO. I'm really sorry I'm going over time. NATO has agreed that, first, international law applies in cyberspace. Second, we can all go to war, kinetic war, because one of us has suffered a cyber attack. NATO, his state and government have agreed that cyberspace is a domain of operations for NATO, where we will defend ourselves as we do in the domains of air, land, and sea. So basically, it's another war-fighting domain. So I would put it, summarize that we're not in cyber war, but in the future, any war will be waged also in cyberspace. It's going to be one part of a war waged in cyberspace. I'll give you one example, and those are the last couple of slides. What happened with air power? This is an Italian pilot, Giulio Gavotti, who on the 1st of November 1911 became the first person to do aerial bombardment. He threw 2 hand grenades overboard his aircraft, not this one, nicer one, over the Turkish camp in nowadays Libya. That did not kill anybody, but that was basically the beginning of the air power. And this is flash forward to 1945. This is a German city of Wiesel. This is basically, just consider how quickly from 1911 to 1945 air power changed the warfare. Basically, by that time, countries were going against the center of gravity of each other with air power. This will also happen with a cyber power. It's not a magic bullet, as the Air Forces was not. We still have navies and we still have armies, but it's an integral part of warfare in the future. So basically, it does not replace soldiers on the ground or sailors at the sea, but we will need to look in the future, basically what type of warriors are we going to need in the future of our warfare? What type of weapons are we going to need in the new type of warfare? And what type of war stories will the grandpas tell the grandkids in front of a fireplace? And I would say that there are so many things that I was not able to cover, but here are the covers of some of my favorite magazine, which basically has been dealing with the future in computing and chip wars and so forth, and data, quantum computing, and the artificial intelligence and everything else. But time is running out, or has run out. Thank you very much. Oops. Sorry for bad timing.
Yes, while my presentation is coming up, I just start talking. Out there it already is. My name is Olav Lysne. I'm a professor of technology at Similar Research Labs. And I will talk to you about lawful interception of internet traffic. My background for talking to you is that I have been heading a couple of national commissions. One suggesting how to go about discussing lawful interception of internet traffic in Norway, and another commission preparing the discussion itself. And it is the second one that I will talk to you about now. First of all, what is lawful interception of internet traffic? Well, the internet of any country is connected to the internet of every other country, right? So there has to be cables crossing our borders. And what the Norwegian intelligence services asked was, we would like to be able to get some data out of those cables. And it's not a Norwegian invention. Many countries have already done that. Sweden, Germany, France, Great Britain, USA, and Canada are mentioned here. Switzerland has approved legislation and had a referendum, and it is under consideration in the Netherlands and in Finland. And some of this audience may know of more examples. But, unknown to most, there is a general assumption that most countries already do this, but they don't talk loudly about it. Denmark is a very interesting example, because they will never confirm that they are actually doing this. But when you read the documents that Snowden chose to release, you will see that, well, yes, they do. They probably do. And so it's sort of relatively safe to assume that this is quite common, but it is not really publicly known. My talk today is labeled the Norwegian model. And my interpretation of that is the model of how we go about having national debates on questions of this importance. And to this audience, I don't really need to explain to you the needs for this. You will understand. You just heard the previous speaker. You know that there are huge cyber threats out there. But in order to understand the popular sentiment around this question, you have to understand that privacy is driving most of that discussion. I usually I illustrate that through the S-curve. And the S-curve is used in many aspects of science, in natural sciences, in economy, and all of this. When I show you the S-curve, it's trying to the reason is to bring your attention to how our society changes as a result of an invention. Assume that when the radio was invented, down at the far left, there was no change in society. Then slowly, radios became cheap. We understood how to use it. New forms of entertainment came. Society changed as a result of that. And as radio has matured, it wasn't every home, then the potential for societal changes have been taken out, and then it's all flattened out at the top. Today, there are two movements along this S-curve that is important to understand. One is the amount of information that is being digitized about each and every one of us. I think we all can understand that. Today, every part of my life today, from I got up till I stand here, when I read my email, what bus I took to get here, all of that information is now digitized. It is in my phone already. The second thing that is moving along a curve like this is hiding behind notions like big data, behind notions like artificial intelligence. And just to give you a small taste of what that is, if about a woman, I know very few things. I know that she's 28 years old. I know she went to a doctor on Thursday. I know that she Googled for a new flat on Sunday. And what I ask you to reflect upon is, what are the chances that she's pregnant? Okay? You understand that for each of those three facts, you understand that, well, the chances increase, right? And then I know some more things about her. Facebook, she's in a relationship. I add to that, well, she just changed job from a very challenging, exposed position into a more safe job. And for each and every fact I add, you understand that, well, the probability that she will be pregnant increases. And then I ask you the question, how many such facts do you need to have before you can be certain? Well, when we reach 10, 11, 12, then the uncertainty in that question is not whether you've calculated it correctly. The uncertainty is in the pregnancy test that she took. And that is where we are sort of heading with respect to the information that is collected on each and every one of us, and why we should worry who has that information. So why is lawful interception difficult with respect to privacy? Well, we wanted to investigate the Norwegian borders, right? We don't want to take data out of the cables in the Norwegian borders. Why should Norwegians worry about that? That will be about foreigners communicating with us. No, it's not as simple as that. Because all the information I gave you about my life today has been digitized. It is in my phone, and it will cross these cables at the latest when I back up my phone. Why? Because Apple's servers are not in Norway. And however I communicate digitally, with whomever I communicate, both of us being in Norway, the information will leave the country and come back again on these cables. So almost everything about my life will actually cross the cables that the intelligence services want to collect information from. And that is what makes this problem difficult. So when we worked in trying to understand this and trying to sort of support a public discussion on what we should actually do as a nation, we found ourselves 4 principles that needed to be followed. We found that lawful interception of border-crossing internet traffic can only be recommended if it finds a solution that simultaneously satisfies 4 requirements. First, it must be technologically feasible. What we suggest must be possible to build. And the reason why I stress that is that, well, I'm a technologist. I know that when I can talk to people about things like this, and particularly when I talk to politicians, they do not understand technology. I can easily draw up some boxes and some arrows, and I say that here is a filter, and no information that is not of intelligence relevance will get through that filter, and they will actually believe me. So the danger, the fact that that cannot be built, will very often be overlooked, because the reason for that is that technologists very, very rarely end up as politicians. So it must be technologically feasible, and we have to have a process to make sure that what we discuss is something that actually can be built. It is not obvious by itself. It has to be legally acceptable, and I will stress that in a moment, because that is difficult in itself. It must not harm the relation of trust that exists in Norway. We are very lucky in that respect, that there is a profound relation of trust between the population and the authorities, and that must not be harmed by the way we choose to do this. And finally, it has to give valuable intelligence. And that turned out to be quite difficult, because however we tried to make the three top of these work, then we went to the intelligence services and they say, oh, if you want to do it in that way, we might as well not bother, because that will not give us anything. So all of these, the combination of these four things turned out to be quite difficult. I will go to the legal perspective of this, because that is the only one of these four that I have the time to talk about here. There are a lot of laws and conventions on privacy. This is written mainly in Norwegian, but from international law, we'll know in particular the European Declaration of Human Rights, which have an Article 8, which states that your communication should be protected from surveillance. Not in exactly those words, but that is how it's been interpreted. And as every law is, well, it is stated in text, but then it is tried in courts. So there have been a series of cases in the European Court of Human Rights, in the EU Court, on cases related to this. And the reason for that happening is that, well, as Snowden chose to do what he did and release those documents, it became clear how many nations were doing this kind of interception of internet traffic. And then in many countries, there were gatherings of people who collected money to try that legally. That has happened in England, that has happened in Sweden, and we see court rulings for that coming out now. Some of them are mentioned here. But whatever we do, when we chose to do that in Norway, that we had a huge public debate on this, rather than just doing it without people knowing. We had to take into account that this would most probably be tried in court. And we could not risk a situation where we introduced lawful interception only to see it deemed illegal in court. And, make no mistake, this will be tried in court. The debate is quite fierce. I've been trying to take part in it for the last year and a half. And it's really divisive. It is the emotion on both sides are very, very strong. And the interesting thing is that there are very, very many who feel that this discussion is a simple discussion. But that group of people who find it's a simple discussion is divided into two camps, and they completely do not understand each other. And there are very, very few people in the middle ground. So standing there has been a challenging exercise. Okay, so what are we trying to do? Well, we'll have to try to find something that is legally acceptable, that is technologically feasible, that gives valuable intelligence, and is trusted by citizens. And I will show you a homemade animation. This is what we're trying to find. And in order to find that, we worked hard and long. And it was not until after 6 months of hard work that I saw that this was actually possible. So we ended up devising, not only saying yes or no to this question as a recommendation, but in order to recommend that this was to be done in Norway, we had to specify quite in detail how this should be done. This is a drawing of it. Most of it is in Norwegian. The important part of it is that we had to suggest that no bit of information from these cables could be used for intelligence work unless there has been a court ruling accepting exactly that usage. And then there are a lot of technical detail on how do you do that in order to when you collect bulk data. Well, okay, then you're going to have a court ruling allowing you to look into that bulk data. What do you do with content data? Well, that is difficult again. The third thing is, well, technologically, if you are to build filters that filters out data that you're not supposed to have, then you have to have technologists that are able to look at the raw data stream. How do you handle that? So there are a lot of technical discussions around these things that are not at all obvious. But the way, the place we are in now is that the Minister of Defense in Norway has put out a hearing document with a suggested law introducing lawful interception in Norway, more or less as we have suggested it. Very, very close to that. And I think you can sense that I have doubted my way into ending up recommending this. But I will just give you a bit of insights into why I ended up recommended that Norway should do this. And these are the three important sentences. The first thing is that we have to continue to give intelligence services tasks to solve in the digital space. We cannot ask them to stay out of the digital space. If we fear that the Norwegian elections are being tampered with, we cannot say that, well, intelligence services cannot do any work for us there because they should not be in the digital space. So they will be given assignments in digital space. And if they are given assignments in the digital space, they have to be able to collect information there. So the next question is, okay, where should they be able to collect information? Where should we allow them to be? And the sad story is that, well, there is no place that does not have exactly the same problems. That every piece of information that we are sort of comfortable of giving to the intelligence agencies are small drops in an ocean of information about each and every one of us. And that is the information, that is the situation regardless of where we allow them to be. So the problem we face is therefore not solved by trying to control where they are. We have more or less to give them access and then concentrate on our effort that are dedicated to preserving privacy. We have to concentrate on that, on controlling what they do. So it's the control mechanisms that, in the end, will save privacy. And the reason why I stress privacy, and I will end by saying this will be my last statement, we are entering into a time where it is technically and economically fully possible to survey each individual in a society 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. We have never been there before. Humanity has never seen that before. Once we enter into that situation, we will never get back. And we are the generation who sees that shift. So what decisions we make when that shift comes is therefore of immense importance. That is what I had. Thank you.
Yes. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you. Yes, my name is Bente Hoff, and I come from NSM, and we are the central agency for protection of critical infrastructure in Norway, critical functions, and we cover both military and civilian sectors. We also run the National Computer Emergency Response Team and coordinate cyber attacks, serious cyber attacks in Norway. It was said here that cyber security or cyber warfare is about protecting our way of life. And I'll come back to that, but I think that's one of the reasons with a highly digitalized society we are, that we aim to see both the military and civilian sectors as one and gather information from all sectors to be able to protect ourselves as well as we can. First of all, I'll say a few words about what we experience on the current situation. We experience that the risk of cyber threats are increasing. As has been said here, the threat actors are becoming more and more sophisticated. But maybe, yeah, a few words about that. We have not seen cyber attacks aiming to damage. We have seen, of course, a lot of criminal acts. We have seen espionage and information gathering. But maybe more important from what we're experiencing is that cyber incidents are becoming more and more difficult to handle. And one of the reasons for that is what we already touched upon, that the different sectors are becoming so connected. IT systems are becoming more and more complex. And this is something that's being taken advantage of by the threat actors. We have seen attacks towards government, defense, finance, advanced technology, critical infrastructure, and also random attacks. One of the questions raised today, and that I was given in advance, was how does one detect and counter attempts of cyber espionage, sabotage and espionage? I think there's one vital thing missing from this question when we focus on detect and counter, and that is everything that has to be done before the attack. The warning time in cyberspace is minimal, often nothing. And if we don't manage to protect ourselves to be able to handle attacks on these complex value chains in advance of the attack, we will be too late. Internet was originally made to support communication needs and functionality, and does not have, relatively said, a lot of security measures built into it. Compared to the physical world, there is not much security in the internet from the attacker till the organization, till the server. The main responsibility to protect and build resilience is on the different organizations themselves, but also the government can do some things. First, I'll talk a little bit about what the companies or organizations can do. What you see here, I'm sorry, this is in Norwegian, but this is it's really about doing good maintenance on IT systems. It might sound sort of as a very basic thing to do, and it is. And simple measures like this will stop most attacks. At least it will slow down the attack. Of course, sophisticated state actors will find ways to go around this, or they will have the patience to wait till the maintenance is not there. But we often tend to not to spend enough time or money on these issues. Of course, what I showed you on the first slide was just a few of the basic things that has to be done to protect our IT systems and our digital value chains. What we also done in Norway is to make a fuller set of things that really helps, and really helps stopping attackers, and we called it the NSM's grunnprinsipper for IKT-sikkerhet. And this is something it's going to take money in each organization to deliver on this, but it's very essential. Another thing that has to be done on a national level is to identify the crucial functions that has to be protected. This is something that's been addressed in the new Security Act we got in Norway from 1st of January this year. But it still remains to identify the objects and the functionality. Then I'll move to detection. Detecting an attempted break-in is important. And in Norway, this has been addressed in several ways. Of course, in each organization, but we also got something called VDI, which is an early warning system. It's a sensor system for cyber threats against critical infrastructure. This system is run by NSM, and it's placed sort of on the borderline between the different companies and internet, or outside the companies, and it's always in agreement with the organizations. We see that this is very important for the detection, and also to put information together between different sectors, between different organizations, between the secret services, between intelligence information and private companies. Not many countries have got this information from intelligence services till private companies connected in a tool like this. Another important thing is information sharing. NSM Nordic, which is a part of our organization and also runs the alarm system I've been talking about now, is also a national point of contact for operational cyber defense, cross-sectoral and internationally. What we see that we have to build more information sharing between different nations and between public and private actors in Norway. This is an area of focus. What we also built is FCKS, or in English, United Cyber Coordination Center, which is coordinating incidents between the intelligence services, PST, NSM, and Kripos, the police. Another area for cooperation, international cooperation while I'm there, is research, threat information, but also policies on the proactive side. If somebody could help me, tell me how much time I got left, that would be helpful. Okay. I think my main message is that security in cyberspace is a complex matter. And it involves multiple stakeholders. It involves governments, international organizations, private businesses, and the end users. And we have to approach this through a multi-stakeholder approach, which is challenging in itself, but necessary. I will not say too much about counter and deter, as the responsibility of NSM is purely defensive. A couple of challenges with it I'll mention. One thing is attribution, that has already been mentioned. But another challenge is the borderlines between peace, crisis, and war. I think the cyber domain has some special challenges in separating between these phases. So, as a conclusion, some takeaways and what to do about this. One thing is the holistic approach and collaboration that I touched upon. Second one is the information sharing mechanisms that has to be built. We have to be able to work together across borders and across sectors and companies to address the cyber attacks that we see, because we cannot get enough information just by looking at one sector, one company, or even one country. We have to build resilience into the systems and in organizations, and the focus must be on proactive measures. If you wait, it's too late. Then they will already be on the inside, and then you will not have control on your IT systems or your value chains. It's possible for the government to build technology and solutions to have a safer internet. The VDI system that I talked about is one such thing. Technical things as public DNS service is another thing. What we got in Norway is also that we build a network on top of internet, so we don't rely on it. It's possible for the government to do such things, to build security where it's not built into internet itself. And we have to plan for not having the same services available if we really move into a crisis and war situation. We build more and more on private actors in the value chains. The business model for private companies are not generally built for war. So if we really move up the scale, we have to plan for second options. And one thing we always mention in this, regardless of which angle we aim the security question, is competence. Doing all the things I've touched upon now, we do need a lot of competence, not only in specialists, in management, at the political level, everywhere. This is a challenge that's also been addressed here in Norway, and I think it's a challenge we're going to have to face for many years. So, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Bjørn Svennungsen. I've been asked to moderate this session. And I think I know all of them, the speakers from before. This has been some very, very interesting and thoughtful lectures. And I would like to start with Sven, maybe, could be the first guy out, who touched upon these various aspects of, are we talking cyber war or are we talking something else? And many scholars argue that military response, since this is mainly a military setting, I would like to start with this, and a military response to cyber attacks sort of distracts us from the actual concept of the day. What we're up against is not really cyber war, it's more like a cyber skirmish. And you touched on it, Sven. Because what we face are sort of continuing hostility from and persistent threats from both state and non-state actors. in various ways: propaganda, political agitation, sabotage by deed, espionage, crime, etc. And in this picture, talk of sort of cyber defense in a military sense seems to securitize a problem upon which traditional power instruments, such as the military, have in fact relatively little purchase. And in that sort of picture, where do you see NATO? Does the alliance have any role in this picture you sort of painted up for us, or is it more up to the states only? Are we left to deterrence only?
Right. I mean, first about deterrence. I'm of the opinion that there is no such thing as a cyber deterrence. There is such thing as a deterrence, meaning deterring something with ability to retaliate. So basically that retaliation or retortion or retribution does not have to be in kind. It can be something else. So we have seen, for example, from let's say let's take the case of 2016 and the Russian hacking against the DNC in US and John Podesta's email. So basically, information warfare campaign. It took horribly long for the Obama administration to do anything. Even though the U.S. Intelligence agencies had we said it with a high confidence already in September, who did it. But it took until the end of December actually to do something about it, and actually that was a expulsion of 35 Russian spies / diplomats from the U.S. and basically evicting Russian Federation from 2 properties, what we were using for intelligence gathering purposes. So that's one thing about deterrence. The other is that I said that we can cross the threshold of actually war, and if we're going to have a war between a capable nation states, when if your country and NATO has a responsibility to defend your country on land, air, and sea, does it have also responsibility to defend yourself in cyberspace? Secondly, is that you might have a situation whereby in a military operation, it does not have to be Article 5 in NATO sense or basically collective defense operation, where NATO as an organization, for example, needs to use some of the offensive cyber capabilities. You can imagine, for example, a situation where you can use different means in order to produce the same effect on, for example, turning off enemy's air defense. Air command control center, radars, or basically transmission lines between them. You can use tomahawks, gravity bombs, special operating forces, and I think in the future, in that options, table of options, military commanders, we also have an option to use offensive cyber capabilities. As I said, NATO leaders have agreed that cyberspace is a domain operation where we will defend ourselves as we do on air, land, and sea. That's very clear. NATO has an agreement basically that, NATO has no integral own offensive cyber capabilities. In the same way as NATO has no tanks. Nations have tanks. NATO is a way actually to combine the tanks and make that operationally sensible. The same goes, for example, for efforts in a cyberspace, where actually there have been a number of NATO nations, including my own, who have declared, and US also, and UK, Netherlands, what I can remember, who have declared that basically, if needed, they can give their cyber offensive capabilities to the needs of a NATO's operation. It can be a collective defense operation, it can be something else. So I would say it is a very, when it comes to a war, it is very much a military situation because this is one of the domains of warfare. No one else is going to do that for our military forces. Thank you.
Thank you. If any of the other panelists would have to comment on the questions they asked, please just raise your hands or just start talking. Olav?
Just a short comment. You said that there is no such thing as a cyber deterrent, and this question might be quite naive, but I'm sort of thinking that many of the things we now see happening in cyberspace are sort of sub-threshold in the sense that it's not really considered warfare. And deterrence in any other area in any other types of force would inevitably seen as an escalation, right? So if you say there is no need for cyber deterrence, I'm not really convinced, because wouldn't there be a need to deter without escalating?
Well, at first I didn't say that there is no need. I said there is no such thing as cyber deterrence. There is a general deterrence. And I think we should grow up and stop worried about escalation, especially when it comes to dealing with Russian Federation. There are some countries in Europe who are basically mostly worried not about what Russia does, but whether what we do about it does not escalate the situation. There is an old saying of Vladimir Lenin, who basically said that we, basically the proletariat, revolutionary proletariat, we should be probing with a bayonet and go until as far as we will hit the brick wall. So basically the question is, how far are we going to go? They are willing to go as far as we, meaning the West, will allow them to go. There is a strong political context to actually nation states doing, for example, public attribution. Because if you do public attribution, that also means that you need to be able to convince at least your allies, for example, with classified intelligence or some other information, also the public, that you have good confidence who did it. But more importantly, if you do attribution, you should be also able to do retribution, meaning do something about it. So here I'm talking again state-to-state malicious activities. And I think the West has been very weak. The response to, for example, NotPetya, which is an atrocious act, $10 billion, very dangerous malicious activity by Russian Federation state actors. The response was basically adding a couple of names to the sanctions list, specific people who were responsible for something. The same was also one of the US sanctions, or US basically list of those people indicted for the DNC hack. Basically people who did it. In the Russian system, basically, I mean, those people cannot travel abroad because they might be then arrested and given to US authorities outside of Russia. Those people, by the way, cannot travel anyway out of Russia because Russia does not allow it. So there's no effect to it. Hence, I would say that the problem we are facing is the general lack of will in the West to stand up for what we are and to defend our way of life, values, and so forth. And I think this is the biggest, let's say, problem we are facing in countering malicious state-to-state cyber activities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have, what you didn't talk so much about, any of you, was the sort of production chain. We have heard a lot last few years about especially Western skepticism to use tech equipment from certain manufacturers. And in particular, these days, we have the same discussion in Norway as we had in many other countries on how should we or should we not use, in particular, Chinese equipment. And one company, Huawei, has been in particular sort of in the media, at least, as many of you will know, in particular related to the new 5G mobile networks. And some argue that we should impose restrictions as a precaution. While others would argue that restrictions will only deepen sort of the gap of trust that already exists when more trust is what is actually needed, more exchange of information, etc., is what is needed in sort of to combat our common cyber threats. What is your take on this issue? Western governments' right to distrust Huawei and Chinese equipment? Please give us an official Norwegian position, Bente. Olav, you start.
This is a very huge and difficult question. First of all, I think there is one surprising fact that need to be established. When you have a piece of electronic equipment like this one, it's a technological fact that whatever resources you put in, how much time you're able to spend, how much money you throw at it, how much resources you give the people doing the work, you cannot investigate what this is able to do. That is just not doable. And that is different from any other piece of technology that we used to have. We can buy guns from our enemies, that's okay, because we can check whether they're okay. They will not turn against us and shoot the bullet in the back in the other way. We know that will not happen. But electronic equipment is different. We cannot audit it. That is impossible. Meaning that the question is very well posed. Buying equipment from someone is an action of trust. You have, if not blind trust, then very, very, very short-sighted trust in a sense that you have to put into it. And it's a relation that lasts for a long time, because even if nobody buys electronic equipment now without support agreements. So every now and then you get the message that we've found some bugs, some security holes, we fixed them, please install this new operating system. That happens to all equipment. Okay, so even if I've checked whether the equipment is okay now, 6 months from now, they can tell me that, well, there's a security hole there, we fixed it. And either you trust us to fix it, or the security hole remains open. So it's buying equipment from someone you do not inherently trust is difficult. And then the next question is, well, can we trust the Chinese? Can we trust Huawei? Then I am outside of my area of expertise. I think there are political scientists who are better to answer that question than I am. But the fact on the ground that is sort of hard to drive true, that electronic equipment is not fully auditable, that has to be form a foundation of that discussion.
Thank you. Bente?
Okay. Yes, I will not touch upon the issue on how much we can trust so different countries around the world either. But I'll add something to the debate, because I think it's also bigger than just the country aspect of it. Because we are a small country, and we depend on vendors or buying equipment from other countries. We also depend on, trusting big European, global, Asian actors in a lot of areas. And one example is the power or electricity industry, where there's also a sector where there's a few big actors. One thing is, can you trust the sort of the state interest in it? But can you trust that we will be prioritized if things get more difficult? That's a totally different question than what you raised, but I think the whole supply chain issue is really big and complex, and for small countries like Norway, it's even bigger than for some other countries, because we have to buy equipment from some other countries, and needless to say, Chinese equipment is going to be there, or equipment produced in China is going to be there.
Thank you very much.
Can I just add one more sentence that I personally would not advise anyone to use systems of that sort, what we talk about here, which are produced by companies which are from a undemocratic, very harsh regime countries, for a very simple reason that those companies are very easily under pressure by the local state authorities to add things, backdoors, you name it, what you would not want to have in your device. I personally do not know people working, I know a lot of people working in intelligence services and so forth. I do not know any of them who carry such kind of devices which I warned against.
Thank you. I'm going to have one more question for you now, and then perhaps a few more later, but one more, and then we open up the floor for questions. So, Shane Harris wrote a book he once called "At War" with as this sign you have in emails. At War, the rise of cyber warfare, where he writes that the response to cyber threats promises to change the shape of cyberspace more than the threats themselves. And that sort of came to my mind when you, Bente, talked about possibilities, for example, for building a net on top of the internet and things like that. That sort of is it like that we have sort of, are we sacrificing the cyberspace, these somewhat 42,000 networks, interconnected networks that we normally refer to as the internet? Is that sort of, and all the possibilities that's in there, are we sacrificing that on sort of the altar of security? Are we so obsessed with security in cyberspace that we sort of forget the benefits? Please.
No, I don't think so. But I think if you look historically on this, and that's not too many years ago, you had for military usage, you had the classified systems as closed networks, and we still do, of course. And then you had an internet built with a main purpose of being able to communicate, free speech, the possibility to be anonymous, or as a principle. And I think we're now a lot of discussions now is about finding something in the middle there. So I think for more and more we will try to sort of add new technology to find safer spaces to stay in between the closed systems and the open internet. So I think that's a discussion and a challenge that we're facing now, but it hasn't been there too long. But I think the discussion that Professor Listner drew up is one of them.
Just to add that, I mean, the internet, what nowadays is used by more than half of the humankind, and by the way, probably close to 20 billion devices connected to each other. I do not know exactly the number, no one knows. So basically everything which is connected. So-called machine-to-machine interface, basically no human in a loop, different thermostats and sensors and so forth talking to each other. So basically we're talking about a huge system, which is basically essentially the same as the internet in the early ages, which was a network meant for about 12 professors to talk to each other. Those people who knew each other very well and trusted each other absolutely. So now we are actually in a situation where that system is global with billions of users, and all of the security is then built on top of it. Very often it is not. Like, the things what you buy, what are advertised as a smart devices of doing things. Usually they are totally dumb devices with no security or very rudimentary security, with factory hidden passwords and so forth. So I think the fundamental issue is that we are using something which is totally unfit for what we're using it for now. So because of that, we have a problem of identification, of authentication, and so forth. And it's horribly hard to work around it because the foundation is, rotten is the wrong word. It was just meant for different purposes. It was not basically meant for what we're using it for now. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Then we open up the floor for questions, if we have any. And those questions could be anything. A few years back, I met the CEO of a large network company based in Silicon Valley, and his largest worry when it comes to cybersecurity was the lack of access to silicium, which you need in all digital components. That was his major worry, not the network problems we're talking about here, but the actual access to silicon from countries. So he said, if I were, for example, Germany, I would start producing silicon as soon as possible. And I think Norway are, I don't know much about this, but I think we are producing silicon in Norway. Because much of the silicon you find in countries that are sort of unstable, according to this guy. So I'm just saying this because questions about these issues could be basically anything. So if you have any, please just raise your arm. Håkon?
Thank you very much, and Björn, and to our experts. This is a very stimulating debate. I would like to try a bit of a maybe provocative question. I've been told that it is very difficult, and what you've talked about today seems to confirm that it's difficult to make any system impenetrable to cyber attacks or espionage. We can do our best to build resilience, but ultimately we can't guarantee that we can defend ourselves. And also, penetrating our systems is not cost-free, but maybe not that costly to do. So this seems to suggest that we have limited ability to do what we call in classical deterrence theory denial, which seems to leave one other option open, which is what we call in deterrence theory we call punishment. So striking back at the opponent, and or at least communicating to him or her that if you do this, then we will do this. We will make sure that you pay for having caused damage or done espionage against us. So I would like to hear what the panel thinks about this. I mean, should we add offensive cyber capabilities to our inventories and make it clear that we will use them if others use such capabilities against us? Or should we do, as was suggested by the panel, that we won't limit ourselves to cyber tools, and we can strike back with other types of capabilities? Thank you.
Bente first, please.
Yeah. Thank you for a good question. But I actually would like to challenge about there's a question. The statement that it doesn't help to build resilience into systems or organization is something I don't agree with. Yes, if you do have a strong, sophisticated threat actor, it is over a long time, it might be hard to protect ourselves on sort of a first border of an IT system or a digital value chain. But by building our value chains and our IT systems so that they have several layers, so you can stop the actor at several gateways, say it that way. I really mean it's possible to create that resilience and that it should be done.
Sven?
Yes, I agree that we should be working at resilience, and resilience is a correct term, meaning that you don't have a concrete brick wall, but actually that you will be able to take hits, spring back to action, and basically continue your services, whatever they are, even under fire. Also, I think we should not limit ourselves to, when we talk about deterrence, by punishment to any one specific domain, and basically this would be very case specific. I think it's illustrative to think back to actually where the deterrence theory comes from, and this is mostly from the nuclear weapons, nuclear war. So basically, when a country is having a nuclear weapons, it's really important that the other country knows that I have nuclear weapons. If you think back to the Dr. Strangelove, there's a famous scene saying that the whole point of having deterrence is actually that the other side knows. So basically what to do for that? You test your weapon, right? So that's detectable. You test your ICBMs. You demonstrate that you have been able to miniaturize the warhead. Then you will have a declaratory policy saying that if you do this, I'll do that. You write that into the concepts everywhere. You exercise that. You demonstrate that, basically. But you have it and you take it seriously. You build the automaticity into a system so that actually the other side knows that this is automatic response. So here we're talking about let's say the Cold War kind of classical nuclear deterrence thing. Nowadays, let's say the gamut of what we can bring to bear against other country, perpetrator country, is luckily much wider. But eventually, theoretically, conceptually, it can range up to a nuclear strike. It can basically range from a diplomatic note to everything else, theoretically. It depends on the effect. Basically, what the effect has been, what you have basically suffered. I'll give you this example from a very different type of attack what one NATO ally once witnessed, and that was 9/11. That was the only time when NATO has evoked Article 5, and in the end we all ended up in Afghanistan because of that, in a war in Afghanistan. So basically what happened in 9/11, what we deemed to be an armed attack, was that civilians took civilian vehicles and flew them into the civilian buildings. Because of the severity of the effect of that event, both NATO and all NATO allies declared and understood that as an armed attack, even though it was not perpetrated by armed forces using arms. So in the same way, when we look at the attacks through cyberspace, we should be not looking too much in calculating our response to what has been the means of delivery of that effect, but actually what the effect of it is. What are the consequences of it? And if they are devastating and catastrophic, then our response should be for opponent devastating and catastrophic. And of course, you know, it's according to international law, it all has to be proportional, things like that. There is one point where you cross a threshold of war in international law and so forth. But of course, luckily, mostly it's all has been underneath that threshold. Hopefully, it will stay like that. I'm pretty sure not forever, because there is really no guarantee that in a time of real war, that the other side would not also attack our critical information infrastructure on what our daily lives depend. Utilities, electricity, banking, street lights, so forth. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm Markku Mantila from NATO Stratcom COE in Riga. Good morning to you all. I have a very big one. I try to make it very short. But well, when we look at the information war or information influence, as we call it very often, cyber war or whatever, the main aim of it is to affect to the life in the West, the way we lead our lives, and to cause distrust and undermine the confidence in our democratic processes and so forth. So my question to you all is that what is the point where we must take action? What is the point and who is the person or institution who says that the buck stops here? If you take one more step, then we do something drastic to counter. And what would the countermeasures be? Because we know that there is one country in the neighborhood, and I'm not referring to Sweden, who is very active in doing everything in the cyber world. So what is the point where the West must unite and say, now it's enough, and one more step, and then we will, do something?
Who wants to start? Sven?
I think this point has long ago passed, and we have slept.
I will agree to that. We've entered into a situation where we see a lot of things happening, and we sort of fear that it's the tip of the iceberg. Luckily, most of the things we see happening are espionage operations, so it's not really warfare, if you will. It's more preparatory things. And then we have a handful of examples that Sven mentioned in his talk today that we know these are actually, if not action of war, then it's action of sabotage at least. But the point where we need to take this very, very seriously and work through what we regard to be our acceptable thresholds before we actually do something, retaliate, react, or whatever, has long gone. I really agree on that.
I think in your question you sort of built in that when do we get to a level where we have to do a lot on a very short period. I think everything we discussed now, all the measures that has been discussed, is a part of sort of countering the situation we are in. It's just done in a different way than traditional conflicts.
Thank you. Anyone else? If not, I have lots of questions, but I want to give you the chance as well. Anders?
Thank you. Anders Loman. I'm heading the Center for International Security at the IFS. Thank you for your introductions. Very short question from me. The nexus between organized crime, hacking, and advanced persistent threats. To what degree do the advanced persistent threats deal with what would be called organized crime? And if we look outside of the Nordic-Baltic region, a state like North Korea with horrible finances, how is the criminal ransomware aspects of this weaved into the advanced persistent threats that we face? Thank you.
No, I mean, our responsibility is to help protecting any attacks that targeted here in Norway. And what you're asking about there is really how do they operate and how do they interconnect and who's influencing who. This is not sort of our area of expertise. This is more the intelligence service and the PST in Norway. But what the general trend that we could say that is, we used the word complex several times today, and also in this area, it is a complex issue where I think in cyberspace, it's easier to build on that this interest cross each other than in other areas. So that's my general answer to that.
Sven, quick note.
Well, in a Nordic-Baltic area, if a cyber criminal is spotted by the authorities, he will be arrested and sent to court for a court to make a decision. There are countries outside of this region. You can name which, you can guess which. Where if a really good cyber criminal is doing its usual work, extortion, ransomware, so forth, and one night he gets a knock at his door by very serious-looking guys, and we're not going to arrest him. We're saying, well, we have seen what you're doing. You're very good. You have a choice. You can work for us if we want, if we call you, or you go to jail and rot there for 30 years. It is free society, it's yours to choose. So basically, when the deal is that, okay, do your ransomware, but not in our country. If you do, you will rot in jail. If need be, we will call you, and when your time is ours. Keep that in mind, and that's it. So basically, there is such kind of nexus in some countries, which is basically, we have seen patterns where nation states have been using, for example, criminal botnets for DDoS attacks, distributed denial of service attacks, basically using things that have been built up for extortion purposes, for political purposes if needed. So you basically see the same botnets being transferred from criminal world to a state-to-state world. And of course, this is, needless to say, it's extremely dangerous. As I said before, actually, according to international law, the fact that the actor, malicious cyber actor, is not state itself, does not make, basically give a free pass to the state if that state is in effective control of that cyber actor. In that case, basically, the state is still responsible, even though a criminal group is doing its bidding for specific purposes.
Thank you very much. I have one final sort of question to ask for comment between. This is between us and coffee, so you better not use a long time for the answers, perhaps. But I'm just wondering. We have some of you mentioned it in your speeches. We have blockchain technology was mentioned, quantum computing was mentioned, artificial intelligence was mentioned. All of this and other technologies could potentially change the cyber landscape in very fundamental ways. And some argue that our knowledge about cyber defense and cyber security and how we think about cyber security will have to change dramatically in the next coming years and will be outdated the way we think about it today. Are we sort of rigging ourselves for a future that will not arrive? Will the changes we see in the next 10 years be even bigger than the changes we have seen in the last 10 years? And how do we meet that? Do you have any thoughts on that? Olav, Mason?
Yes, we will see changes over the next 10 years that are greater than what we've ever seen. But I think we're sort of at this point trying to struggle to adapt to the facts of the situation we're actually in now, and the situation we're actually in now is rapidly changing. So I think the question you ask now will be as relevant in 10 years as it is now. Things will change. We don't know what, but I think that what is going on now is basically we see most of our nations standing on their heels trying to keep balance in this changing world, and that situation will continue. But what is going on now in most nations that I have insights into is well, they're doing reasonably good things, and that what is happening now is not preparing for a future that will never come. I think what is basically the main picture is what is going on now is reasonable and good things. But we are out of balance, yes.
Thank you. Bente?
Yes, I think we have a highly digitalized technical society already, and I think partly what we're discussing now is have we been able to adapt to that regarding cybersecurity on the way. And the technologies you've been mentioning, they will come and they will come fast, and threat actors, they will be of the first to adapt the technology and take advantage of that. So I think this is something we must have focus on this. It's important, and you're right, in 10 years there will be other technologies, but we have to keep the focus.
Sven, final comment?
The thing with the really big revolutionary technological changes is that our ability to guess this impact in the future is linear, but actually they work in exponentially. So basically, exponentially, the first maybe 20 years, it seems underwhelming, but then the exponential growth is going up. So I think we might be seeing things what we have no idea even yet what the impact would be. Some words on quantum computing and AI. In quantum computing, if that comes to an age, it's actually is working already, but a very small capacity. That basically means that all encryption what we have now will be redundant, because the brute force attack can actually solve any encryption, not any encryption, it will be able to solve a asymmetric encryption what is mostly used in everyday use, in banking and HTTPS and everything of that sort. It would not probably be able necessarily to break the symmetric encryption. At the same time, and this is the flip side of the coin, is that the quantum computing, of course, because of a particle entanglement, gives us other opportunities for a new type of encryption which will be totally unbreakable. So basically we're looking at also a quantum encryption systems in the future. When we talk about AI, I think we need to, and artificial intelligence, we need to distinguish between whether we talk about that in a narrow sense or in a universal sense. When we talk about in a narrow sense, what we really talk about is basically that three things, that we have a lot of data, big data, we have good algorithms, and then machine learning. And then basically we are proving that in a very narrow range. And that's basically what we are using every day already. This is Amazon is suggesting books for you because of that. And that's basically is working there. That's probably gonna get much better in coming years and will improve very much our daily lives. There are a lot of problems with that in terms of, I don't have time to go into that. But already now there are reports that machine learning algorithms can spot the tumors or the cancer better according to X-ray scans than the best doctors can. When we talk about AI in a universal sense, then this is a totally uncharted territory, because in the end, when we get very quickly to a technological singularity, and the basically time when basically if humankind invents a computer which is smarter than humankind, then that will be the last invention of what the humankind does. And we have no idea whether then actually the humankind is necessary for that computer to hang around or not, or are we just becoming a nuisance for a computer? So I think this is basically I have seen actually very sensible people. For example, one Estonian engineer whom I know, who was one of the chief engineers of Skype when Skype was created in Estonia, whose basically main task is now to travel the world and warn the humankind against building an AI without a kill switch. So basically that before it gets too smart, humans can turn it off. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sven. And thank you very much to the panelists. Then we have a 10-minute coffee break before we meet again for our next panel. Thank you.
welcome to the second part of this fascinating discussion where we're going to take the leap from cyber as a technological problem to cyber as a social and psychological problem. And that particular difference, the technology versus the psychology, is the subject of my own presentation. Cyber ends versus cyber means is really what I want to cover here. Now, as far as I know, and you'll have to ask Bjorn to confirm this, as far as I know, I'm here primarily because back this previous spring, I was given the opportunity to write an article for The Atlantic on what the United States can learn from the Nordics and Baltics about protecting elections. And that gave me a great chance to reach out to some truly brilliant and fascinating people in every country bordering the Baltic, with the exception of two, the second one being Germany. Pace, Germany, I like Germany. Then this opportunity to come here and speak with you gave me the opportunity to repeat that set of interviews in the United States. And so I went around interviewing a bunch of people in the United States, and I learned some interesting stuff. And one thing that I learned is that sometimes Americans like me think that we're better at things than we really are. And so you can see in my opening photograph, that's the US military liberating Norway in 1945. And we're being welcomed, thank you very much. And I'm not so sure we had that much to do with that particular liberation, well, at least not directly. So interviews. I really try to take a journalistic approach to this project, and it's interesting because in the United States these days, taking a journalistic approach makes you an enemy of the people. And so I wanted to give you an example of how journalists are supposed to behave in the United States these days. Not really. And the first person that I want to talk about, and I can't give you the names of these people because the interviews were either off the record or I'm sort of semi-direct quoting them. So if you want to, some of them I can identify later if you're really interested, but most of them I can't. So I can tell you that on the day before our elections this year, we had a visitor to Harvard, a gentleman who is in charge of election security for a very large American state, and who previously did similar work at the federal level. And he was generous enough to stop by Harvard on the day before the elections, on his way to New York to be a talking head on one of our many fake news channels. And he spoke about cyber defense and the elections. I mean, again, this is his job, very senior official. And he began his talk by saying, we've got 4 threats we've got to deal with. Number 1, voting infrastructure. That's the machines that we use. And we've known that we've had specific vulnerabilities in our voting infrastructure since 2006, which was like, wow, that's a long time ago. Number 2, online voter information. There's just too much available in the United States in terms of our voter rolls. They can be tampered with. Number 3, the election night return system. And number 4, fake news and misinformation and disinformation on social media. Then he proceeded to give an excellent talk where he covered the first 3 in depth. And I learned a great deal. Didn't say anything about fake news or misinformation or disinformation. And so I had a chance to interview him following his talk. And I said, hey, you covered those first 3 topics really well. How come you never went back to cover the one about psychological resilience? And he said, oh man, that's too hard. We just don't know. There are no easy solutions. I didn't feel I had anything useful I could say. I don't know, maybe more media literacy education? He didn't know. And I assume he wasn't doing much about it. But to double check, I went and talked to an American diplomat. And I said, is this familiar to you? And he said, oh, Jed, let me tell you a story. Years ago, when I was working in Moscow, I was chatting with a Russian general about cyber defense. And we talked for a while. You know, you can't say that much, but we were having a nice conversation. And at some point, he claps me on the shoulder and he says in Russian, thank you so much. You just make my job so much easier. And the diplomat says, what do you mean? What do we do to make your job easier? And he says, when you talk about cyber defense, you have the conversation that we're having right now, where it's all about technology, offensive and defensive technology. Whereas when we look at cyber defense, we see it, as Sven pointed out earlier, we see it as just part of information warfare. And
by ignoring that aspect, you just make our lives easy. You leave all this low-hanging fruit. It's wonderful, thank you. I learned that. So after that, I went to talk to a gentleman who was a senior White House official under President Obama. And I said, do these stories sound familiar to you? And he said, oh yeah, I'm in continual shock. He says, this goes back all the way to the beginning of the Obama administration. Every time we go to Congress to try to explain what's going on in terms of cyber and in terms of the vulnerabilities of our society, especially the psychological vulnerabilities of our society, our lack of trust in institutions, the rifts within our society, they say, so if we change the algorithm, will that be repaired? And over again, this seems to happen. And he was really just, he was not surprised that I had gotten these previous remarks. He said, you know, as we learned from our senior election official, it's too hard. At the risk of making Harvard look kind of silly, there was an otherwise excellent study done in 2017 at Harvard, not by me personally, but by some people who are much smarter. And they were interviewing campaign managers all over the 50 United States to try to determine how prepared they were to defend the political campaigns from cyber threats, figuring that those could be used as they were in 2016 in 2018. And the 2017 report was kind of devastating. It concluded that not only are they unprepared, this is the state and local American political campaign managers, not only are they unprepared in terms of cyber defenses, they don't care. They ranked cyber defense as low on their list of worries about running a campaign. And then, and this is sort of the part that is kind of embarrassing for Harvard, when the actual report came out, they never mentioned disinformation or misinformation or manipulated information on social media, et cetera, any kind of influence operations or active measures. It wasn't one of the questions they asked. So the questions they asked about technology, oof, the answers were disturbing. There were no questions about the non-technological aspects. Now, meanwhile, it's worth pointing out that the concept of integrated information warfare is part and parcel of the Kremlin's mindset and has been for a very long time. And you can note the use of technology in this, this old photograph. They're spouting the predecessor to Russophobia. And even though they have the horn, then, the tools are human. Information warfare is an old word. Disinformation is an old concept. And I think that in the United States, we are fixated for one reason or another in not looking at this in a historical and in a societal way, and instead focusing on technological quick fixes, technological threats and technological fixes. There's one more American interview that I want to summarize. I had a chance to interview or communicate with the gentleman who headed the cybersecurity research program at the National Science Foundation. And he had lots of time to talk because right now he's on furlough because my government is shut down. So he had plenty of time. And I'm going to read you his quote because I think it's worth reading in the entirety. I have a few quotes that if time permits I want to read. I think computer science folks are trained to look for technological problems and technological solutions and not looking enough at the human aspects. I've said in several public fora that we, the computer science community, were so focused on manipulating elections by hacking voting machines and to a lesser extent voter registration systems that we missed the risk of hacking people, that is social manipulation. The technical cybersecurity folks are very good at the adversarial mindset, thinking like an attacker, but we focus on the technical aspects of how an attack happens, and therefore the technical techniques that can stop them. It would be useful to encourage both communities to talk more to each other. I find in talking to some of the sociologists that they're just as ignorant about technology and what can and can't be done as computer scientists are about the human aspects. And I can assure you, as a social scientist, that is true. All right, meanwhile, back in the Nordic-Baltic region, the kind of cross-disciplinary collaboration that our furloughed friend was describing was something that I learned while conducting my separate set of interviews in the spring. It seems, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems from the interlocutors that I had that this kind of cross-disciplinary, cross-sector, and even cross-governmental collaboration is something that is going on and has been going on for in some states a very long time, in some states a shorter period of time, but still a few years, in this region. And I want to read you, and this is my article, and I want to read you some quotes from this article that are really just channeling folks that I interviewed in this region. Given the emphasis placed on cyber defenses and social media algorithms in many American conversations about disinformation, it is surprising how rarely Northeast European officials emphasize technical solutions to the problem. It really did shock me. Everyone took cyber seriously, and almost no one I spoke to in this region would discuss cyber defense with me without mentioning psychological resilience of the population. Another quote. Unfortunately, though, many of the advantages Northeast Europeans have against disinformation may not exist in the US. Your ability to implement whole-of-government solutions relatively easily is enviable, but challenged to recreate in the United States. Similar are your typically high levels of institutional trust. Quote, the greatest strength the Danes possess, says a Danish foreign ministry official, is the high amount of trust toward our government and institutions in general. This makes it harder to sow distrust and polarize debates. That's a description of the exact opposite of the United States right now. It is a superpower that you have in this region, and one that I envy, and I hope that, that we can imitate someday. More on that shortly. One more quote from an Estonian cyber defense expert, which I think gives you the whole story, and there it is. It's hard to build cyber resilience without education. In the face of info ops, you have to empower your citizens to be good citizens with critical thinking, media literacy, and political awareness. I'm not exactly sure why this is and why the United States seems to have a blind spot here. I'm wondering, is it our institutional weaknesses? Is it your history? I mean, perhaps your familiarity with these kind of techniques dates back far enough that you have a history of looking at this without looking at it through a technological lens. Maybe. Or maybe there's just an American tendency to always leap to the quick fix. I don't know the answer. All right. It's easy to be hard on the United States these days, so I'm going to go with a very optimistic conversation that I had with a group of American information operations officers. They really impressed me. For one thing, I asked them about cyber defense, and they said, how about we talk about cyber offense? I think we'll give you a better idea of what's really going on. I said, great. And one of them said, let me describe to you our methodology. Quote, point to point, the officer is tasked to achieve a product. First, I analyze the target audience. Then I determine the desired effect. I come up with the best way to deliver the message, and the resulting behavior change is my product. Cyber's just a vehicle for me. And then he clarified, he said, you know, you can use cyber for criminal activity. You can use it for espionage. You can use cyber to steal money, to steal intellectual property, to possibly get access to military plans. But when you're using cyber for influence operations, the way these gentlemen do, you're using cyber strictly as a delivery mechanism. And he went further. If I'm shutting down someone's sewage system, it's not because I like human sludge. It's because I'm looking to achieve a particular reaction. It's still about hitting the human psyche, even when you're attacking systems. Sewage, finance, energy, whatever. Yeah, I'll move along. He also pointed out, or actually his colleague pointed out, that cyber doesn't equal information operations, but the influence aspect is huge, especially when you're dealing with Russia and China. And finally, he said, cyber doesn't hold territory. And I was kind of confused because I'm like, well, it could help. And he clarified, well, it can help you take it, and it can help you hold it, but only via influencing human behavior. Okay, that was it for my optimism, and now I'm going to close on some disturbing notes. This is an anecdote. I'm lucky enough to have a diverse group of friends on Facebook, and one of them is an expert at the Pentagon who's been in a lot of different places. And he posted a fairly interesting, somewhat lightweight, but fairly interesting Australian article on great power conflict with Beijing and the need to have the United States more engaged in the Western Pacific, an Australian point of view. And this was what he said on Facebook. And you know, it's the kind of thing that he shares all the time. And here's some reactions that came in. First reaction. Now we're too busy making sure trainees can get surgeries and kill themselves. So first reaction, hey, guys, there's a potential for great power conflict. with the rising China, especially in the Western Pacific. Our Navy is at risk. I hate the left. I really hate the American left. That's what we're spending our money on. Reaction number 2. Okay, once again, I hate the left. Number 3, and this one's worth reading. So the reactions go on and on. And I clarified. I talked to the official and I said, can you just confirm to me that these aren't bots? I mean, these guys, they're sounding like they're being broadcast from St. Petersburg. You know, they're saying you don't have a great power problem, you have an internal problem, and you should hate the other side, your domestic left. And he confirmed that these are all veterans. These are all people who he's served with in the field versus America's enemies. And here they are, and just the numbers are, these were the first 3 comments. About 50% of the total comments on this particular post were of a similar nature. Yeah. So the way that the foreign disinformation and the organic disinformation that's rooted in social divisions is so effective is something that I think it's really dangerous to lose sight of, and they reinforce each other. And sometimes you can't tell the difference. I honestly had to ask, are these real people? They're not only real people, they're service members. All right. The Nieman Fellows. This is probably the most prestigious program for journalists at Harvard. And I have a picture of the Saints game right there because the head of the Nieman Fellows happens to be the only person at Harvard who's as passionate about the New Orleans Saints as I am. So that's for him. So he asked the question of these senior American journalists, will the quality of information we use to make political choices get any better? You know, what's the future here? And here's one answer. Essentially, the mainstream political parties don't have the answers to the underlying questions that the population needs answers to. And then number 2, we built this stuff to do this. A lot of you have had conversations with the folks who work at Facebook, who work at Twitter, and they built these platforms to be emotive and to communicate attention-getting thoughts. So we did it on purpose. And then finally, I'm going to close with one more quote from The Atlantic, which is also a quote from a Baltic minister. The stakes presented by disinformation are remarkably high. In the long run, the contest of narratives is about core post-war values such as multilateralism, individual rights, and the rule of law. If we are serious about defending Western values, now is the time. Disinformation is a very efficient weapon to demotivate people, to create doubt in leadership. The vacuum is never empty, but is filled by populism or nationalism or radicalism. We are just starting to realize this is real. Ends versus means. Something to think about. Thank you.
My name is Jonas Kredinskas, Cybersecurity and IT Policy Department Director at Ministry of National Defense, Lithuania. I'd like to thank the organizer for inviting me to share our national experience on Lithuania experienced 55,000 cyber events per year. So this is a number of events that we handle either automatically or through also intervention of our specialists. It's increasing steadily for almost 10% every year. European Union records like around 4,000 incidents each and every year. Well, much more important, I would say, is this slide that shows what the targets are mostly interesting to our adversaries in our state sector or critical infrastructure. And as we see it, the energy sector, law enforcement sector, foreign affairs sector, they lead the way. And it kind of shows how the adversary sees the attack vector. So disrupt electricity that we've seen already in many countries, affect law enforcement sectors, so they would not be able to communicate between themselves effectively, prevent us to communicating with foreign partners, make a disruption in finance sector, and so you have a perfect storm for the major cyber event in the country. So just to illustrate what kind of threats now emerging, I can quote two issues. One, for example, was the information attack directed against our Minister of National Defense. That was the beginning of last year. The adversary infected the networks of one of our main news and TV companies. They lay dormant for almost a few months, and then they placed the fake news on the website about the Minister of National Defense. It was just for about 10 minutes. And as it showed later, that was not the main target, the main vector. But they were also infecting the mail servers of the same organization. And so a lot of high officials within the Lithuanian government received an email, which was kind of sent from legitimate source, saying that this is a sensational news about the Minister of National Defense, so check it out. And if they press the link, so there is a malware on the other side waiting for them. Luckily, most of them, they opened this news on the phones, and the virus was basically constructed for the computer systems. So it didn't have a major effect. The other one that we also witnessed is Yandex taxi program that our National Cybersecurity Center did a research on, and we found out that it sends number of unidentified information to the Russian servers, and also has access to a lot of sensitive data on the phones. And I would say it's not the cyber aspect that for me is the most important, but basically by getting information of the people who's using that app, knowing that the index is closely connected to the Russian government, you basically have a base within the country of people that can be susceptible to information attack. You can, through the app, you can send them SMS or some message trying to influence, for example, during the election time. So knowing all that, and knowing, as Mr. Sakov told, that the action, the time for action is past due, so what we did on national and international level to address that. So first step that we took in the beginning of 2017 is to develop a plan. How can we organizationally, what steps we need to be taken to create a robust cybersecurity system within Lithuania. So first, we incorporated the backbone state network operator into the Ministry of National Defense system. Then we consolidated all the cybersecurity roles that were distributed among few agencies under the one umbrella of Ministry of National Defense. And since the beginning of last year, so 2018, the Ministry of National Defense is the only institution that's responsible for cyber defense. Well, the other two, the State Data Protectorate, responsible for private data, and the Cyber Police that is responsible for addressing cyber crimes. The next step was to implement the NIS directive, to create also Lithuanian cybersecurity strategy as a way ahead how we're gonna reach our objectives. So to further strengthen the cybersecurity legal framework. And as the last step is to create autonomous, secure network of the main state institutions that are crucial for the functioning of the state. So three main objectives is a very strong national cybersecurity center, a secure network, and unified security requirements that can be used both for the governmental organization and for business. So this is how our National Cybersecurity Center, it kind of has its three tiers. The main, and on the top is the CERT, that consists of the biggest part of the National Cybersecurity Center, the people who handle incidents. Then we have a compliance authority that monitors how the organizational technical requirements that we formulate, how are they complied within the state and critical infrastructure system. And also we knew that no good cybersecurity center can do without good R&D. Because most of cybersecurity center, yes, we buy a lot of off-the-shelf products, but our main systems are built on our own products and homemade tools. The legislative framework, cybersecurity strategy, and here I again want to refer to what Mr. Sakov told, and I would fully agree with him that the main aim of cybersecurity is to ensure that we can carry on with our way of life. That's the most important part. So then we constructed our cybersecurity strategy kind of having this one goal in mind, and through strengthening cyber defense capabilities, addressing cybercrime, addressing and raising awareness, public-private partnership, one of the key elements if we want to succeed, and also international cooperation, as I mentioned, with partners, because a small country as Lithuania would not be able to defend it just on its own. We need strong and reliable partnerships with others. So one of the elements of our cyber resilience is the so-called cornerstone governmental network that would have within itself the main institutions, state institutions, that are important for the function of the state. We have a special regulation that says what is important, what are vital functions of a state that have to be ensured in the peacetime, in the time of crisis, and in the time of war. So by creating this network that can work autonomous, and even if we lose a part of a territory, we still see that it can still function at least partly, and they have all the main government data within that network. So we think that we would be able to address a lot of cybersecurity issues by consolidating it and taking care, I mean, within one or two organizations, and not just transferring the responsibility for each and every head of this institution. Because there is not just enough talent and not enough manpower to have all cybersecurity experts in each and every of main ministries, parliament, municipalities, and so on and so forth. So we would like to be able to take care of the data and of cybersecurity collectively to protect what's vital for the state. Well, now I want to move to the partnership part. And by partnership, I mean both internally within the country and with international partners. One is this, you see the example of our Minister of National Defense signing the cooperation agreement with main media portals. And we signed this memorandum in order to address the security concerns of them, cybersecurity concerns, to help them to maintain the secure channel of spreading the information, avoiding the cyber attacks, and through coordination, through preparation, through common training. So we already have training sessions for them, showing different approaches to improve their cybersecurity. Their training with our cyber specialists, seeing how we do that, how we address that. And they have a lot of issues on their own that partly different from what we advise to other people. And for example, one is that we always tell, okay, don't open the messages from the people you don't know. And if we tell that to journalists, so basically would not have any news. So we have to find new and innovative ways to approach that. Another one is Lithuanian initiative under EU PESCO project, Cyber Rapid Response Team. We see a lot of countries investing heavily in cybersecurity nationally. And basically, most of the efforts are based on how countries can defend only itself. So we say that we need a cyber rapid response team, and we have to create this new capability within the EU. So countries would be able to help each other. And we start with addressing the legal issues. We start with creating the prototype team. And as we speak today in the Amsterdam, there is a yearly meeting of this PESCO Rapid Response Team project. There are overall 9 countries that already joined, 4 observers, and most of the project benefits and products would be the new capability and the new legal framework that would help us to know how can the countries help each other. Well, at the end, also we have a good cooperation with the United States, the Regional Cyber Defense Center, having more US cyber presence in Lithuania, cooperation to ensure cybersecurity energy field, and also working on elections, asking to help in and advice on addressing cyber issues. Well, and this slide is basically, I want to show that a lot of commitment and a lot of effort usually pays off. And it doesn't show that Lithuania is the most secure country in the world. This index is National Cybersecurity Index, is from e-Governance Institute in Estonia. But it shows that we are able to commit ourselves in prevention and preventing cyber threats and managing cyber incidents, and creating the very robust legal system so we can move forward. So this is in a nutshell what we have done in Lithuania, and I would be happy then to discuss later on within the session. Thank you.
That's the one, yes. All right. Okay, good. All right, so it's still good morning to you, everyone. And I'm glad to be here. It's always nice to visit Oslo. It's almost like being home in Helsinki. And the weather is very much like the one we have in Helsinki these days. Cold and, well, cold and snowy. I will speak today to you about robot trolling, something you might be familiar with already, but basically I'm speaking about messaging with automated accounts. You might come across with messages that are not by humans, they are delivered by robots, or automated accounts, and I will show you a couple of examples how amazingly powerful they might be and how deceptive they might be when used well. But before I go deeper into the topic, a word about bots. They are not always bad, and that is something you should bear in mind. There are in many cases bots are used to help us. Well, they take care of simple tasks, and for example, when you chat with an airline or bank, you might come up with a bot who answers to simple questions, and that also is very useful when it relieves you to do something more important, and let's say relieves resources for something that is perhaps more exciting to do, and not that boring as answering to very simple questions about flights and bank accounts and so forth. When I speak about robot trolling, I mean automated accounts that are there to cause harm. They are there to make you behave in a way you wouldn't behave normally, and they are there to create chaos, undermine the confidence in democracy, democratic processes. They interfere in elections, and there are a number of examples of that kind of action already. And well, really, when I speak about robot trolling, it always means something harmful. Let's say a word about IRA. It's not the one that was very active in Ireland. It's something that is very active in St. Petersburg. And just give you a couple of figures. This is from a report made for the U.S. Senate. IRA, this Internet Research Agency, the troll farm in St. Petersburg, they involved heavily in the US elections. There's no doubt about it. And if you look at the numbers, $25 million were used in the operations, and well, only through Facebook, the IRA was able to reach 126 million people in the USA. I read the report by New Knowledge. I'm not quite sure how big part of that messaging was from robots, but I'm sure that a big number of it must come from automated accounts, meaning that there was really a real intention to interfere in the elections and affect to the results. Another report made for the US Senate came to similar conclusions. The aim really was to polarize discussion in the USA, and that's the tactics IRA uses. It aims at the extreme left of the political landscape and also to the extreme right to make the crack in the middle wider. I would like to speak to you about Mr. Virta. He is a Finn. That surname is very, very common in Finland. and he lives in a place called Ylöjärvi. If you pronounce the place right, it sounds like somebody's growing up, but that place really exists in Finland. And here is some information about that guy. He gives out his personal security code and phone number and all that stuff. He's a cutting machine operator. There's his mobile phone. And he's a very open person that he gives also his credit card number and all the security code in the public. But as a matter of fact, there is no such a person alive. Well, to be quite honest, I created him in one boring day in office and in last October by using fake name generator. It took about 0.5 seconds to create this guy. If you go and Google, you may find fake name generator, and then you just tick that you want to have a name from USA, a male, and there's a name comes up with social security number and all the details you need. And why this generator is there? It is to create people who do not actually exist on the web. That's how these automated accounts operate normally. They need somebody who looks like human, so you create a fake name. Then you need a photo that is taken normally from Tinder or other exciting places on the web. Then a prepaid SIM card is needed to make the phone call to verify the account, and voila, there you are. You have a social media account for a person who does not exist in real. I hope that I can show you this video. It's a very short one to illustrate to you how this works in practice. Can you put it running? Click and once again. And now that one. Yeah. Great. We need no sound. Yeah, well, so if you follow my postings on social media and you suddenly see, let's say, 200,000 likes to one of my postings, it might not be because of my colorful personality. This is the best price I could get from the net. If you want to have 100,000 visitors, $4 only is needed. I don't know if that is for real, but that's what I found from the net. You can find click farms if you Google. This guy here who is lying on a pile of prepaid SIM cards, he's from the Philippines, and he runs a company that works around the clock creating fake personalities. And what is really needed? A name, email account, photo from Tinder, for example. So if you find your photo there as used for a fake person, and the photo is from Tinder, you might need an explanation for your spouse. And then you need also a prepaid SIM card for verification. So this is very important now when you know that there are a big number of fake identities on social media. And how to know that they are fake? Well, it becomes more and more difficult to see the difference when the account is automated and when it is for real. But let's say that on the average, you need only, let's say, a couple of, well, $50, and you can buy 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 followers, and you make and you can make an impression of yourself being much more popular than you actually are. And when we are approaching elections in various countries, this is important because there might be a temptation for some political parties or politicians to buy followers, to buy likes, to make the political idea he or she represents more likable than it actually is. There are some examples from the States. The first one I came across was about Mitt Romney, whose followers rise from practically from 0 to 100,000 in one night, and that was then suspected of being bought followers. And then there are celebrities who have more than, let's say, 10 million followers, and whenever they, let's say, want to make some kind of advertising, saying that buy Audi or buy a new record from some band, they get more than $10,000 for every tweet or every posting they make, and you can't be sure if all of those followers are for real. I used to be a newspaperman before my career with the government, and very often I was asked as the chief editor that how can I tell to an advertiser how many people really sees his advertisement on the paper, and I was challenged that there's no data I can tell him. That's right, I could not. And then when social media came, I was told as many times that, well, now we can measure, you know, exactly how many people see my ad. Well, we can't, because we don't know how many of those persons are really real. And these robots, they are done very carefully. Meet Naomi. She's a robot, even though she doesn't look like one. Actually, the face was from a golfer from Spain, Petris Recari, apparently. And if you look at her friends or family, they seem to share the same opinion on Audi, phrasing exactly the same way. This is a good way to see that there's a robot operating. It shares the same sentence, the same link, the same news. It doesn't create very much authentic material or something that is original. Even though these days I'm told that the IA makes it even easier to a robot to create content that looks like it is done by a human being. Then we have examples of tremendous use of robots. And whenever somebody speaks about NATO on the web, an army of robots and trolls wake up. And this is from Estonia. 2 years ago, we measured at the COE, where I work for, a record number of bot activity. If you look at the Russian-speaking messaging on NATO in Estonia, 85% of the tweets in 2017 were generated by bots. 85%. And that also indicates to you that there must be some professional player behind it who wants to affect general mood and the how NATO is seen in those countries. And it's not very hard to guess which country I have in mind here. But really, 85% of the tweets came from bots. This is the last slide I have. Hopefully I do not exceed my 15 minutes. Why should we be worried about hostile bots? Why do they count? The first one is, of course, the distortion. Let's assume that there are, let's say, sensitive topics before elections, as they are in any countries, immigration, sexual minorities, and so forth. bots are very useful in creating a feeling that this kind of idea or, let's say, opinion is something that people really talk about and that this is what people want, even though that is not the case. Bots are very handy in polarizing people, and that's the main intention, to make the cracks in the society wider, to make the people suspect the decision makers and diminish the trust we have in society. It's very hard to root them out, and that's also some social, well, I will also blame social media companies. I'm sure that Twitter, Facebook, and whatever companies we have, they know the problem, but then again, it's a matter of money, because they earn based on the clicks and how many see the ad or how many followers you might have. That's why big number of followers means money, and it doesn't matter, well, whether they are human beings or robots from the viewpoint of social media company. And bots are very easy to use in hostile messaging and very difficult to attribute. Well, I can't see any case in the nearby future where Russians or whoever uses bots comes forth and say, okay, yes, we have them. We have deployed bots. They will always say, we have nothing to do with them. We don't have bots. And it's very difficult to say that, well, it was this and this country behind the attack or the interference we have seen and experienced. Thank you for your attention.
Hello. Sneaking in from behind, sorry. Just a moment. Terribly sorry, but the mic keeps falling off, so that's a bit inconvenient. And I was told not to stand on the stage, but I think that's fine. Okay. Let me see. It's super inconvenient, actually, but anyway. We'll see if this works. Hello, my name is Hanne Røiselien. Really a pleasure to be here. I should introduce myself briefly. I am an advisor now to the Major General of the Cyber Defense Forces and senior researchers there as well. We have just established a digitalization innovation research unit, actually, so I'm part of that one. And being part of the military, I have to say that it would have been interesting if we had anyone from the military sector, actually, of some armed personnel to talk about the headline of this whole seminar, which is cyber defense. And so I sit here and I feel a little bit alienated when it comes to the heading of the seminar and also the discussions and the topics that have been raised. That being said, of course, it's been very interesting to listen to you, but I would really like to get a little bit back to what the heading of the seminar says that this is about, which is cyber defense. And I think it's been interesting also to, when I'm sitting here, working for the military and would deal with cyber defense every day, how different we all approach it. Cyber defense has seems that it's a jar of cybersecurity, some civil actions, some online internet things. It's a very broad, at least the way we tend to talk about this in public, we approach it in a very broad and general way, bouncing between some kind of public affairs, public education, something, and also very in-depth technological insights. But so I'd like to really approach the panel just by saying to ask you more about, like, if you could connect your talks more into the cyber defense heading. I thought it was particularly interesting, both with you there. Oh, sorry, I can't remember all the names at once. When you talked about the measures that you've taken, you said that there are a lot of things you've done over the past few years. But one thing is to have processes and to have, implement measures. But you also mentioned things like there is, you have that challenge of, for example, when there was this virus and people open it on their phones, and that was a good thing as in terms of cyber defense. Because the virus was meant for computers, apparently. I thought that was a very interesting example of how the civil sphere and civil sector is actually part of the whole cyber defense. Could you say something more about that?
Yes, I think, and I mentioned that the civil-military cooperation is a very important issue. Maybe I didn't elaborate enough on it. What we saw is that basically if you have a military networks, so they're very well protected. Usually they're separated, they're well protected, secure. And if we have military people protecting only military networks, so I think we would miss one of the elements that in the time of crisis and at the time of war, there would be certain critical infrastructure that would still need to be protected. So our approach is that we take these military people and bring them into our National Cybersecurity Center to work together with the civilians on day-to-day threats, both in the government networks and the critical infrastructure, so they see real examples, day-to-day examples, and if the need comes, they would be familiar with the critical infrastructure, they would be able to protect it. And I think this is what we see more and more in many countries, because the military networks, I would say, is really now built very like a bulletproof. And they would be used in the time of war mainly. But the critical infrastructure part is becoming more and more vital to the function of a state. And we have to kind of bring closer military and use this resource so they would have peacetime tasks on protecting critical infrastructure, so they would be able to address the wartime task when the need comes. And also civilians would be more familiar with the whole process, and they would be able to more easily, for example, to integrate to some task if there is mobilization going on. So this is kind of our approach. That's where we are driving our military-civil cooperation. And very important moment, again, is the PESCO project, creation of rapid response teams, both nationally and then internationally. Because nationally, we are striving to form these teams on a military level, but also incorporating some civil elements. And I think this is the way to go. Okay, thank you.
I have one more question to the panelists before I open up for questions there. So just be prepared. I want to go over to our American panelists there. I just came to think of something. I'm part of a think tank at the US Naval War College,
And we had a dinner there about a year and a half ago. And I was sitting beside of someone who was working in the White House. And I asked him what he was doing. And he said, well, my job will be to try to keep the president away from Twitter. I think he completely failed. Now I heard he's unemployed. But anyway, it's something very interesting he said also about trust. Because the way that the US approaches cyber defense is quite different from many of the European models. You've been militarizing the domain in a way with the establishment of the Cyber Command. But still, it's also going back to what you mentioned as well, that the issue of trust, I'm pointing out Lisna here in the front, that the issue of trust is key to, and it's really a big part of any kind of security measure when you try to include the civil society. You need, and I'd say for any democracy even to work, you need trust from the civil population towards, for example, the military. I've been working in the Middle East for decades, and have you seen the issue of trust towards public institutions in the Middle East compared to the US? Fascinating. In the Middle East, you would be the public trust towards public institutions, particularly the military and the police, would be between 3 to 7%. In Norway, it's about 90. So good luck with that. But I've seen when you talk about trust and trying to engage also the civil society, one of the things that you see in the US now is that the public trust towards, I'd say towards the government and many governmental institutions is sinking. How do you think that affects your cyber defense efforts?
Great question, and excellent point about both the United States and the Middle East. Many countries in the Middle East. Yeah, trust in institutions is key not only to the human aspect of cyber defense, but it's also key to maintaining your democracy. Trust in institutions can lead to trust in electoral integrity, for example. So something that we were discussing last night. If I have a digital elections system and I harden it so that it is unhackable, my adversary may very well not bother trying to hack it. That would be incredibly expensive. Rather, they might spread disinformation to say, oh, it was hacked and your vote was misinterpreted, and especially circulate that disinformation among the folks who are part of the political party that lost, or parties. And perhaps that would have just as great a detrimental effect on faith in democracy as actually going through the trouble of hacking the system. I believe they're going to go for the low-hanging fruit. So wherever there's mistrust in institutions, they're going to exploit those. And creating mistrust in institutions it's not an end in itself, but it's very close to one because it creates a vulnerability that you can then come back to. It's a real challenge for the United States right now. If it makes you feel any better, the latest data shows that the US military is still trusted than most of our other institutions, so we have some faith in them. There's some real divides, though, in terms of the left and the right on that particular subject. And when you can tie trust or distrust in institutions to group identity, then that's a real vulnerability. So if I can make trust in the banking system part and parcel to being a Republican, that means that I can then target the left with distrust in the banking system and actually threaten the US financial system. So it's a very big deal, and I think that it's been severely under-addressed and sometimes internally exacerbated in my country.
All right, so enough of my questions. Can we open up from, I'm sure there are questions from the floor. Yes? You want to start?
Thank you very much. Fascinating listening to you talking about these digital influence operation challenges that we face. And my question is, I suppose, mostly to Jed and Marco. I think you very succinctly identified the challenge that we face, these actors that are operating in the cyberspace on Facebook, on Twitter, creating creating a lot of attention around ideas that are not necessarily as popular as they appear on cyberspace. My question is, what do we do about it? And how do we address it? I mean, you've identified the problem, and particularly what role does the government and the military sector have in dealing with this? Should they get closely involved and work more closely with the private sector to address this? And should we have teams of specialists and maybe AIs working to delete bots and so forth? So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. And you can't guess how much I hope that you did not ask that question, because it's really the core of the problem. First, we are living in a world where free speech is one of the most important values. And whatever we do in that field, we must be very, very careful of not limiting people's right to express their opinions. And as you know, that even sometimes very crazy bursts of opinion are within the limits of freedom of speech. I've been dealing with that matter when I was with the Prime Minister of Finland for a number of years, and I'm convinced that there is no tactical solution for the problem. It must be a comprehensive approach, a strategy. Of course, we need, let's say, examples of lies and disinformation and all that kind of stuff. But I would be very careful in creating task forces that hunt down, government task forces that hunt down fake news, because that might easily be interpreted as the censorship or something like that. We need examples, of course, but I would concentrate on two main issues, and they are, in the Nordic countries we don't have that problem because we have well-educated people, and in all Scandinavian countries. That is my judgment. And I have always said that the first line of defense here is primary school and good primary school teacher, to make sure that the youngsters, they know what they come from and what is their identity. Second thing I'm a bit worried about is media, quality media. And that is doing very bad in Europe as a whole. And the readership is down, and advertisers do not spend that much money doing their business with traditional media anymore. So I think that we should figure out some, let's say, way to support quality media. But again, that is a bit problematic if the government gives money to free media. But I just can't see quality media in countries like Finland, Norway, Sweden survive very long without some sort of support.
And I will echo you in the emphasis on identity and helping especially young people develop an identity that makes them feel a part of the society, and the importance of quality media, whether that's public media, private media, or both. I agree that the solution is not going to be technological exclusively, although technology is a big part of the solution. It's part of the larger cyber defense solution, and it's also part of the information and operations solution. In terms of practicalities, I don't want to use up everyone's time, but I break it out into 4 areas. Technology is one. Awareness, probably the most important one, is another. Just driving awareness of these are the places where the adversary senses our vulnerabilities, so just be aware of that, rather than tackling the specific fake stories. The broad areas, you got to build awareness there. Coordination, so coordination intra-government and also intergovernment, especially when you're dealing with small nations. And coordination is both about sharing, these are the memes that are out there, this is the fake news that's out there, these are the bots that are out there, but it's also about understanding the positive influencers and the positive memes and the positive notions that are out there, so that we can amplify those and tap into each other's networks of influences, because different audiences are going to respond to different folks as messengers. On education, I'm just going to throw this out there. It's controversial. Education is essential to establishing identity. I don't think media literacy training and critical thinking skills are the solution to this particular problem. They're a solution to a lot of problems, to making individuals better participants in a democracy, to making them better citizens, to strengthening the economy. But when it comes to countering foreign disinformation efforts, especially those that have to do with foreign policy, I don't think it's effective. I don't think it's a silver bullet. All right, now I'm going to go way out there. I don't think it's a silver bullet because of issues of salience. And salience is, do people care enough to tap into those critical thinking skills no matter how strong they are? I'm really lucky. I've had a decent education. I think I've got some okay critical thinking skills. I'm certainly skeptical of a lot of things. But if, let's say, hypothetically, and I know this isn't happening, it may never happen, but hopefully it will, that there's a championship hockey game between Norway and Sweden. And for some reason, I'm curious about the score of this game. I pick up my phone, I write in Norway, Sweden, game's ongoing. So first thing that pops up is the score. Great. I put my phone down. I don't check my source. I don't double check that score. I don't even look what my source is. It could easily be a bot or a hacker or someone who's making bets on the game, a big criminal institution making bets on the match. And the reason why I don't check is because I don't care about hockey. I mean, no offense, but I really don't care. I care about hockey about as much as your average German citizen cares about the geopolitical significance of Nord Stream. And I'll stop there.
Just a moment. We have someone waiting there first.
I think that a lot of valid points were touched upon here, and really development of critical thinking and checking the sources. But I fully agree that the normal person, I mean, on a normal day, he doesn't check every day the sources. But also we should not see like kind of the adversaries that want to influence us as kind of have unsurmountable resources, power, and so on, and we so weak and we cannot do nothing. So I think every bit counts, developing critical thinking, technical measures. I can, for example, mention one where we use the artificial intelligence to find the fake news. It's called the debunk.eu. That uses kind of a special search algorithm developed by the private media companies that checks, for example, if there are pictures, the same pictures as you show, somewhere on the other sites, and then they just indicate. They say, okay, this tweet, this Facebook post is suspicious. I mean, you have to check it. I mean, it might not be genuine. So people who want can check it. So, and integrating both technical kind of tools with the critical thinking, I think at some point would create the synergy and help us at least move towards the goal. There's no silver bullet, but it's not justification not to do anything.
Okay, and the last question comment from the panel.
Yeah, well, one short comment here regarding the resilience. It should be beared in mind that disinformation operations, they might last long. We don't speak about days, weeks. They might last years, even decade, and that is important to bear in mind. Just to give you one example, a very short one. Let's assume that you have a 15-year-old schoolboy at home who is tasked by his teacher to write a piece on Ukrainian crisis. What the guy does first, Googles, right? And he runs into a number of fabricated documents, false information that is put there on purpose. And the whole intention of this operation is that bit by bit, false information finds its way to school books, news articles, even PhDs, and they change the perception of the world. And that's why when we look at disinformation campaigns, we should really remember that they last long, And that's why a very comprehensive approach, from my point of view, is important.
And then we have one more question there.
Thank you. My name is Gudbrand Søfrud. I work for the Norwegian Defence Material Agency. As to the liberalism of Western society and our emphasis on free speech, is not that a bit of an Achilles heel in concert with the social media, where everybody has a say and everybody can say whatever they want to without any retaliation from anyone? So would censorship or personal identities for the users, would that be a solution, part of the solution of the problem? That if you want to log on to Facebook or Twitter or the others, you have, the system has to know who you are. Did you hear me?
So I suppose in the long term, just to follow up Markku, it could very well be that liberalism itself in the Enlightenment tradition is a centuries-long disinformation campaign to discredit monarchy. You could make that argument.
Careful now.
In the end, we do have to make a decision, and I mean we collectively as the West, and then I also mean we or you as members of the European Union or members of the European community, we as NATO, you as Norwegians, and we all of us as children of the Enlightenment have to make a decision that there are certain core values that we buy into. And the question came up, what's the role of government, what's the role of civil society? I think the role of government, and because there are no women on this panel, I'm going to go ahead and quote a powerful Baltic woman. First and foremost, the governments should ensure that they have their own strong narrative rooted in values that are understood and appreciated by the citizens, including, for better or worse, free speech. The minute we go down the road to censorship, that's when we've switched sides. That's when we're doing the work of the other team. Now, is there a possibility of regulation? You mentioned making sure that you identify humans. Really hard to do, probably a good thing, but as Markku pointed out, very difficult. But outright censorship, I'm an American, so we just don't do that. It's something you can do in Europe, and we really just can't do it because of our Constitution. And I'm thankful for that. But we have to be extremely, extremely careful, sir. There was a time between the end of World War II and roughly the end of the 1990s where we did have a fairly strictly mediated discourse, thanks to a few trusted outlets in each country, and in my country especially the 3 TV networks. That period of about 50 years is short in terms of history. It could very well be that thanks to our new tools, we are going back to something that resembles more of what the world looked like in earlier periods, where you don't necessarily have a strictly mediated path of influence. In my country, for example, newspapers in the 19th century and indeed in the 18th century were run by political parties. And discourse actually looked fairly similar to the way it does today. And I don't know if we can go back to that window of strictly mediated discourse. But Markku, I've given you enough time to think, so you can give a better answer.
I don't, but well, since I've been with the media since 1985, well, that might reveal to you my age. Sorry for this, but well, when you look even let's say more back in history, when the newspapers were founded, I can't tell in case of Norway, but in case of Finland, in the first newspapers, the language was very wild. And I would assume that most of the articles, or many of them, published, let's say, early 1900, would not be published today because of the language. And if you now look at social media, Facebook has been with us 15 years, 20 years. And if you, let's say, try to remember when was the first time you posted on Facebook or on Twitter, it's very short time indeed. And I would assume that in the next decades to come, we will be more responsible also on social media. We will learn to behave. But before we do that, a lot of harm will be done by ourselves and also foreign interferers.
Okay, sure.
Well, I just wanted to go back to one of the slides that was shown here. 85% of the comments were made by bots. So and that's not free speech. So this is, I think, sometimes we lose this kind of angle that when we talk about the free speech on Facebook, so big percentage is not a free speech. Well, whether it's crime, whether it's influence, how you call it, and we have to fight that. Yes, it's very difficult to find this is division line and how to identify it, but we clearly have to distinguish. These 85% is not free speech, is an informational operation to influence our way of life. So, and I think from that angle, we really have a bit less discussion then. Because still, I mean, the people, we can distinguish even, like if you read the comments under the article, if you look at it critically, I think you can distinguish bots and people. Because usually the normal people, they make an argument and say, okay, I think this is something, and if you read the bot, it tries to impose his opinion on you, always. Because in other way, there's no sense for the bot. So I think at some point we would be able to distinguish it, and technically, and we have to distinguish the whole notion of a free speech. We for free speech, but we against for misusing it.
Okay, last brief comment, then we have to wrap.
Well, since I'm from Finland, and you might know that the Finnish language is not the easiest one in the world, but it has its advantages, I can tell you. Sputnik, that claims to be a news outlet, it's not, it's a means of propaganda, of course. They opened their news service in Finland sometime in 2015, but it survived only about 6 or 7 months. And I would assume that one reason for the short existence was because it's a very difficult and costly business to keep a Finnish language news site updated so that it looks like the real one. Since I'm a native speaker, and even though the articles made by Sputnik were rather nicely written, but you can see as a native speaker that they are not done by a Finn, and that's why I think it disappeared very soon. And the same might apply to Norway as well, I think.
Okay, we have to wrap things up, but I have a brief question to the panelists in the end. Since the question is how to do cyber defense, is it possible to turn the challenge of cyber defense to a success story? Because now we just talked about the problems and the demise of, I don't know, free speech and our civilization and whatever have you. Maybe I'm just colored by my own job, but is this gonna end well?
Well, the answer is yes, and I could stop here. We learn every day more about it, sure, and there will be a lot of backlashes. We will be beaten up badly because of this cyber thing in the future. But in the end, I'm sure that we will win.
Once again, I'd like to quote a powerful Baltic woman. The new head of public diplomacy at the EU delegation in DC was in the audience at a panel in DC that I chaired, moderated, and we were talking about countering disinformation. Well, she stands up at the end And she says, I'm tired of talking about countering disinformation. How about we talk about broadcasting truth? How about we talk about getting out in front of these disinformation narratives with our own positive narratives that unite us as a continent and as a transatlantic community? How about we use some of their same tools, but not in a harassing way, but in an amplification way for what we truly believe in and what makes our system better? You know, if we do that, I think we might have a decent chance, because in the long run, you know, kleptocratic autocracies are terrible.
Well, I also would say that I see the very positive outcome, and I mean, we used to see kind of a cyber crime and cyber offense from the other state as kind of a very sophisticated, very well-financed thing, but I mean, now countries also very well finance their defense operations, and they have a lot of specialists, and it's becoming very expensive to penetrate the networks to critical infrastructure. Well, it's not bulletproof, but it was the time and with the technologies it's getting there. So I myself, I'm very positive, and I think, well, we have to believe it, because if we believe in the state, that state can protect itself. So we have to believe that cyber defense is going to win.
It does feel better to end on a positive note, so thank you. And applause to the panelists. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of the road. But before we go and have a well-deserved lunch, I'd like to just try and briefly summarize challenging task, some of the main points that we've heard there today. And I think we can all agree that doing cyber defense is a complex task. It's not just about computers anymore. It's about protecting our entire digital infrastructure, which today includes pretty much everything, including our cars, refrigerators, and power stations. And we've been told that we live in a hyper-connected world where digital attacks can deal a great deal of damage, and not just intentional damage. Things can spiral uncontrollably out of hand. Some of the hostile actors we have to contend with are non-states, such as criminal organizations, companies, terrorists, yes. But the most serious actors are still nation-states. They're still the most capable actors out there. Cyberspace may be without boundaries, but it's still influenced by geopolitics. We've talked mostly about one major actor, Russia, which coincidentally is, of course, the neighbor to the Nordic-Baltic states. So geopolitics also matters in cyberspace. And we've learned about a tool that we can use to mitigate some of the challenges we face in cyberspace, namely the lawful interception of internet traffic, which we're now debating in Norway, and which we've learned that most states probably already do. But of course, when we implement tools such as this, we get into the age-old debate about privacy versus security. Is it technologically feasible? Is it legally advisable? Does it give us the valuable intelligence we need to combat and deal with these challenges? And perhaps most importantly, does it do so in a way that preserves public trust? Because if there's anything we've learned here today, it is that particularly when it comes to digital influence operations, the most powerful defense we have is in fact maybe the high level of trust and confidence that the public has in our institutions and in our societies. And if we undermine that, we might be making ourselves weaker, in fact, by implementing some technological solutions that in fact weaken some of our most powerful defenses. We've been told by practitioners that the public and the private sector needs to work closely together and are working closely together. There's little warning time in cyberspace, but we need to implement those early warning systems that we can. We need to share information. We need to have good public-private cooperation, and we need to work together internationally. Will there be a cyber war? The consensus seems to be no. Cyber is one tool in the toolbox, and it could potentially trigger Article 5 and a general war if it passes a certain threshold. But of course, our opponents are probably aware of this and will probably keep their actions below that threshold, so specifically not to trigger such an action. We can use other means to respond to serious cyber attacks, but we have to ask ourselves, is it politically and militarily realistic that we will do so in an extreme case? And these are difficult questions which we'll be debating in the years to come. Should we use digital equipment from certain states, such as China? Apparently, we can't check to make sure that this equipment is actually safe to use. So we have to trust, and admittedly, trust in certain actors such as Russia and China are low in the Western world at the moment. So it seems that we should be careful about what we buy, what we purchase, what we use of digital equipment. The good news seems to be that resilience and denial can be done. It's difficult, but we can do it to a certain extent. So we don't have to rely only upon offensive cyber capabilities to retaliate. And moving from the technological into the social and the psychological, we learned that dealing with this information may be even more complex, in fact, than dealing with the more technological challenges that we face in cyberspace. I was certainly astonished to learn, as you all learned today, that 85% of all tweets, I believe it was, dealing with NATO in Estonia in 2017 was generated by automated bots. That is an astonishing high number. And obviously, this is a major challenge, which we will have to address. The good news is that we seem to be doing something right in the Nordic-Baltic regions. We have a certain resilience due to our high level of public trust, level of education, public awareness, and media literacy. We're not quite as politically polarized as some of our major allies are, and these are strengths that we should probably cultivate and build upon and try to protect. We've learned a couple of new words: trolls, sock puppets. These are apparently bots that don't identify themselves as bots, but pretend to be humans and operate in cyberspace. They create the illusions of popularity and support for ideas that aren't actually quite as popular and widespread as they appear, and they therefore distort reality to fit a certain agenda that certain other actors have. This is obviously a huge problem, which we will have to deal with. It was interesting to learn that our best defense is probably not military or even security measures. Our first line of defense is a good primary school, apparently. Our second line of defense is the free media that continue to operate and is funded. Public awareness of the problem is a huge advantage, and possibly also fact-checking agencies to combat fake news. But there are no silver bullets and no easy solutions, so undoubtedly this will not be the first time we will be discussing these issues. In closing, I would like to thank our 6 cybersecurity experts for having traveled to Oslo and given generously of their time in order to enlighten us about cybersecurity. I would also like to thank Bjørn Svenoksen and Hanne Røslien for having done a marvelous job of moderating the 2 expert panels. I'd like to thank the Estonian, Latvian, and Lithuanian embassies in Oslo for a very productive and smooth cooperation on developing this seminar and for providing national experts and funding. And a special thanks to Ambassador Janne Jolsera Rosula, who originally suggested that we organize the seminar together. I would also like to thank the Norwegian Ministry of Defense for having provided much of the funding for today's event, and for the wonderful administrative staff at the Norwegian Defence University College for making sure that today has gone off mostly without a hitch. Finally, I would like to thank all of you. Your curiosity and patience will today be rewarded not only intellectually, but also physically, as we have now reached this seminar's high point, a free lunch, courtesy of IFS, which will now be served in the room behind you. So, thank you for your attention.